Okay, thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, I can't imagine there are any. Okay, the minutes of the public board meeting held on the 29th of July this year, I'm happy to refer record. Yep. And the matters arising are two items on the action log, 127, 128, both of which are on the agenda today. So presumably that satisfies that requirement. So straight into staff.
Sorry, Chair. I'm struggling to put a hand up on here rather than Teams. Can I just make a request for a change to the notes for that, specifically around the point that refers to me and a comment that I made. The papers state that I had stated that what we were discussing at the time was an unacceptable variance to plan, when in fact I was referring to the Elective Recovery Fund variance being an acceptable variance to plan. So if we could amend that in the minutes, it would be appreciated.
Well done, John. Thank you very much. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Staff story. And today we're talking about overseas nurses who are not just an important part of our existence, a crucial part of our existence. And we've got some representatives of that talking to us about leadership and the Overseas Nurses Shared Decision-Making Council and all the things that they do to help themselves and hopefully tell us some of the things we might be able to do that would make that better. Sharon, I think you're running this bit of the show.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. So members of the board will remember the emphasis that we've placed over the last 2 years, particularly in looking at enriching our nursing workforce, reducing our dependency on a temporary workforce, and really pushing the employment of internationally educated nurses. Our internationally educated nurses here at Northampton are a real asset to our organisation. And what I've done today is I've asked Kirsty Palmer, who's our lead nurse for workforce, and some of our colleagues to share with us their story of coming to Northampton General. So Kirsty, over to you.
Yeah, morning everyone. Thank you, Sharon, for the introduction. So as mentioned, we're here today to talk you through some of the processes and some of the roles that we play in supporting our internationally educated nurses to come and join us here at Northampton General Hospital. So part of my role as lead nurse for workforce is obviously to oversee the project and the collaborative approach that we're working with NHFT and Kettering General as well. So I'm going to hand you over to Liam first of all, who's going to introduce himself and talk to you a little bit about his role, and then we'll introduce you to one of our internationally educated nurses who has joined us in August. We're just going to move around the room so you can see us on the one screen.
Next slide, please, Kieran. Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me here today. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview, really, of what part I play in assisting our international nurses, and particularly of the recruitment process. If we could go to the next slide, please. So on the screen now is some of the things that I do in order to support our nurses. And really the role starts when I liaise with the agency and we get our names for our nurses who will be coming over in the cohort. I make contact with them and send them out a welcome email. And in that welcome email, it really introduces a little bit about myself, how long I've been at the trust, but also gives them information on about like relocation to Northampton. It also tells them about the compliance checks that they'll undergo for our HR. We get some information on their pay and for HMRC. We also include in that email some of the shopping grocery list, and what they will do is they will then return all that paperwork to me and I will go out and do their shopping for the first day of arrival. The other part of my role is when they arrive, I get them a welcome pack, so we will give them bedding, pots and pans, cutlery, all their crockery that they'll need, and just some groceries so that they can then make themselves at home in the new nurse's home. Another part of what we do is I set them up on a WhatsApp group, so I try to collate everybody together in a WhatsApp group. It's the easiest way for us to really communicate with everybody at one time. So if they've got any information that they want to share with us, they can pop the questions into the group. They've also can then contact me on WhatsApp if they'd rather direct their query to me individually. But also, if I've got any information to share with the group, it's really easy for me to put it in the WhatsApp group and get everybody on the same page and give them the same information at the same time. We do an on-call service, so that when the nurses are here, they can contact us as well for the pastoral support. If, say, for example, they arrive on a Friday, then they've got the whole weekend to settle in. We like to support them through that weekend so that they're not on their own, obviously, with the first weekend being in the UK. I am the main link for between the nurses and multiple teams. So that's with the senior nursing team, with the departments, the practice development team, and the ward sisters, just to try and get that little bit of support for them. We also offer some financial support, which has been really successful. So as part of the relocation package, we will offer them claim back on visas, flights and things like that. So what I do is I support the nurses in claiming that back and making sure that their expenses are covered. We like to set them up because when they arrive in the UK, a lot of our nurses obviously won't have a UK bank account. So in order to pay them into a salary, their salary into their account, sorry, I liaise with HSBC in the local town centre, which we've built a really good rapport with, and we get them set up. And if we can't get them set up in time for the payroll deadline, I liaise with our finance team to get them cash, and that just gets deducted out of their salary so that they can spend that money on groceries or anything that they might need just to tide them over before the salary can be paid into them. Before COVID, we used to do hospital tours, and I would take people around to the tours, a tour of the hospital, and I'd meet their ward sister with them and just try and introduce them to somebody on the ward so that we could put name to faces and help support the nurses a bit better. Since COVID, obviously, that the hospital tours haven't been possible, but we are now working on doing a reduced tour. So it will just be the key areas and with a smaller cohort rather than in such a larger cohort. And all these things that I've listed today are working really well in order to support the nurses. And we're also introducing callback sessions, which we've just done, which is at month 1, 3 and 6. We ask all of the nurses to come back in their cohort, and we will then talk to them about any concerns they've got, any queries that we might not have addressed in the initial stages. But it's really to just help them support them more in getting settled into the UK. In addition to our pastoral days, which will then talk them through example of pay slips, understanding contracts, trying to explain a bit about tax and how to expect deductions from the salary on their pay slip, and also just a bit of information about what area they'll be assigned to in the hospital. And that's pretty much everything from me in terms of what we do to support. So I will hand over to Ranjitha now, who's going to share her story with you. Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning all. I'm really excited to meet all because I'm quite new in this group. I'm Discharges. I'm newly recruited nurse in Northampton General Hospital. Our batch came here August 4. Typically, I can describe myself an above average nursing staff who was working in Singapore for the last 5 years. And I was waiting to finish the COVID, therefore I can go back to India and to meet my family since I haven't met them for the last 4 years. Fortunately, Northampton gave a destination place here. I successfully finished my interview and I posted in Farrington Ward, which is a renal unit where I have a working experience. Everything was perfect for me before my travel, other than the accommodation information and the flight ticket. I received the flight ticket 2 days or 3 days before my travel and the accommodation information when I heading to Changi Airport. But I was excited and by watching how I was overcoming all the struggles at that moment. When I reached into London Heathrow Airport, I waited a few hours there, but our well-supported team from HR, especially Liam and Kirsty, they sent a message and they arranged a temporary accommodation for that night. And I stayed there. And the very next day, I moved to New Nurses' Home in Area Q, Northampton General Hospital. I felt more comfort that moment, and I was pleased with the welcome pack that I received. The next following days, I was exploring myself to find the necessary things in town center, like a strange person in the city. And I was waiting my cohort who was undergoing the quarantine since because I don't need to do since I am came from the green list country. The next week, we started our OSCE program under a well-established practice development team. They gave full support to complete our OSCE training. Presently, me and my batchmates are waiting to crack the OSCE on October 2nd. Hopefully, we will pass this one with a full pass. And if anyone asks what is the best thing that I felt in the last 2 months here, without any doubt, I can say the abundant help from the HR team, especially from the Liam and Kirsty and our practice development team, because both teams are really eager to know what are the feedback from the candidate to give a positive outcome and to build their future. And we are happy here and almost we settle here. We familiarize all the areas here. And from my reflection throughout the recruitment process, I have 2 suggestions. It is better if the candidate get a signed offer letter from the NHS trust itself. So it will give a clear information for the candidate in their emergency where they can contact. The next thing, if we did a complaints checklist in order to check the readiness to fly, 2 or 3 days prior to their travel date. It's really vital for them to check themselves how they are prepared and what their level for the traveling. So these are the thing and tiny experience for the last 2 months that I can share with you all. Now, I can affirm that Northampton gave a warm welcome to me and my cohort in these days. Now we are ready to welcome all the new aspirants from the different country who love to work in Northampton, and we are happy here almost, and we are welcoming all the aspirants as well. Thank you for the opportunity to share my experience and share my words throughout this media. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ranjitha.
Can play the next video. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Questions, comments? Congratulations.
My name is I'm an internationally educated nurse from Tamil Nadu in India. I received my conditional offer letter from NGH in August 2015, but I couldn't start work until June 2016 because of the delay in receiving my decision letter from the NMC. But throughout that time, the HR from NGH kept in contact with me. They even sent me the certificate of sponsorship way ahead of time to assist me with the registration process. I finally arrived in the UK in June 2016, and the first month was all about orientation, inductions, and training for OSCE. And it was a very mellow time to help get adjusted to life in the UK and to the different clinical area. So now I work in the neonatal unit. I've been with NGH for the last 5 years. I'm a junior sister now. I'm involved with the International Shared Decision Making Council, which is a council for new international nurses to support them in their early days, especially in the first year. So nurses like me who've come from different countries. So I'm from India. There are nurses working in NGH from Africa, from different countries in Asia. So we support them by providing them with pastoral support, helping them with groceries, orienting them to the hospital and the town, and providing them with any sort of social help that they would need in their first days. I'm also the co-chair for the REACH network, which is the Race, Ethnicity and Cultural Heritage Network, which supports staff from different ethnicities, different cultures, to be able to perform well, to flourish and thrive in NGH, as NGH is all about diversity, and we are valued and respected for what we are. I'm also part of the reverse mentoring program, which helps me bond with a senior member of the trust board, helps me learn about different roles of the senior members of the board, which I probably wouldn't have known had I not been involved in the program. So I enjoy working in my ward. It's a beautiful blend of all cultures. We have nurses from Philippines, from India, from Africa, and from England and Wales. We have a wonderful culture. It's very positive. I look forward to coming to work. In the future, I hope to play a much more substantial role in the development of this hospital, because I'm quite passionate about being involved at a corporate level. Thank you for listening to my story.
And that was just a few members of the team who are involved in the recruitment process of our international nurses. We just felt it was important to share with you today that we the most important part of our role is to listen and learn from our cohorts that have come over the years, so that we can improve and work on things to make it better for our future cohorts that are coming in the future. And that's it from us.
Okay, second attempt from me then, because I don't understand what's happening. Thank you very much. Thank you, all three of you, and for the video. Any comments or questions or thoughts about that at all? Jill?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the presentation. Sharon and colleagues have done a fantastic job in making sure that we've got so many international nurses. So it's a real success story. I wanted to say a particular welcome to Ranjitha, who's so newly arrived, and hope you get to see your family soon. 4 years is an awful long time. So good luck. And particularly to ask of Ranjitha, is there anything that we could do even better? So that's the first question. And then to Sharon, a bit concerned that it took a whole year to get the NMC PIN number through, and I'm hoping that that's a much smoother process now. And do we have something similar to a preceptorship package, or is what you're describing a preceptorship package for the first few months while the international nurses settle in? And then just finally, I know we're beginning to work on introducing international midwives to our trust, and I wondered how we were getting on with that.
Okay, thanks, David, and then Anne.
Sorry, just trying to find the unmute button. Well, we had a presentation from some international nurses a number of months ago. I think it was at the People Committee, and one of the issues which came up at that stage was concerning accommodation and the fact that we were accommodating nurses, I think, at Moulton Park at a University of Northampton Hall of Residence, which was empty at the time. How are we for accommodation now, and how will we be? Presumably we have some plans, since we are expecting a lot more international nurses to arrive. Finally, I would also like to echo the comments of Jill. Yeah, it's great to hear from all you folks who are enabling our international nurses to settle so well, and it's good to hear from the international nurses themselves, so thank you for that.
Thanks, we'll come back to that. No doubt Sharon and Stuart can answer that. Anne?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for sharing your experience. I just want to know, a bit similar to Jill's question, if there's anything else we can do to support your health and well-being, when you're here. And also a question for Sharon. I know that we have international doctors, And I wondered what level of sharing and learning we're doing with them to help their experience be a good one as well. I know Toyosi has done some work there, and I just wondered, are there some, I'm sure you're doing this, some synergies and some shared learning there. Thank you.
Okay, that seems to be all of that. Sharon, you want to kick off the answer and then maybe call in any of your colleagues like Stuart about accommodation?
Indeed. If I make a start on the latter part of Jill's question. So in answer to your question about the NMC challenge, Jill, that was a blip that was being experienced nationally. That is no longer an issue, and NMC papers and numbers are coming through as one would normally expect them to do subsequent to an application being made. Yes, our international nurses do preceptorship in the same way that our new graduates do. So it's an ongoing process from their OSCE training to them commencing in a ward area, going through a period of preceptorship. So there's absolute equality there. The latter question you asked around the bid with international midwives, we've submitted a bid in partnership with the University of Leicester's and the University Hospitals of Coventry and Warwickshire. We are awaiting the outcome of that bid, but I remain hopeful that we will be successful in that. David, you asked a question around international, no, was it Jill? International doctors. Toyosi has been to see us before she started her work to understand the work that we've done with our international nurses. So there's been lots of synergy, lots of work continuing. And as the work with our medical colleagues grows and continues, I'm sure that the mutual benefit will continue to be there.
Stuart, accommodation?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So we've, yeah, so the first group of international nurses, we worked with the university to house those guys. We've got 208 of our own rooms on site, and we're outgrowing that. So the longer term plans is to build new accommodation, and we're working on plans on how we do that and how we fund that. In the meantime, we still work with the university. I don't know if Liam is still on the call. I believe Liam has a plan for our overseas nurses for the next batch group that are coming over. Liam, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. So we do still currently work with the Northampton University on a smaller level. But at the moment, I work with Marina in the accommodation office to utilise the new nurses' home as much as we can. And how that works is that we've got we do a turnover after 2 months, so we offer them the accommodation for 2 months, and in that 2 months' time, we seek external accommodation for them and help the nurses get their own more comfortable accommodation after those 2 months. And so far, it has worked really well for the turnover.
Okay, any Mark? And the other question I have around is this is all around welcoming and so on, but you know, it's important these nurses see a future here in the UK in general, but also in Northampton. So I was wondering from the nurse herself about opportunities for further education, and does she feel that's easily accessed and fair and equitable for practitioner courses or theatre courses or whatever courses you want to do? I'll come to Mark first, then I'll come back to you. Mark.
Thank you, Alan. I think from Marina's presentation, she's well after Sharon's role in the near future based on what you're talking about her corporate development. So, but you're right to call out around further development for people as opposed to just bringing people to the hospital. It's important we develop them. I think I just wanted to pick up the question in and around doctors arriving from overseas as well. I think it's fair to say that we haven't had the history or experience that we have had in the nursing team, and we'll need some of that. And equally, just, you know, we need to bring it to the board's attention because it's important. There's also a level of investment that we provide in our nurses that we bring over from overseas that is not necessarily corresponding with our doctors that come over from overseas. So there is still a piece of work that we're working on. In fact, I met with Geraldine just this morning to talk about that on my team in relation to together to make sure we're able to give people the same experience.
Sorry, lost some connection there. Heidi.
Thank you. Just to echo what Mark said, really, I met with the HR teams yesterday on medical education and discussed the international doctors aspect. in quite a bit of depth. So there is definitely some work we need to do there. Been talking to Matt about it. So we need to learn from this programme, but there is work we need to do. There's some really passionate consultants that want to work with us on that and are doing some really great work already.
Okay, thanks. Ranjitha, talk to me about how you think about opportunities and further training and practitioner stuff and so on.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I proposed already to Sharon regarding this one. As we are working in a developing country, something like India, most of the bodies are not accepting a person who is working same time and who is studying same time, because it's not calculating their experience hours. At the same time, it's not upgrading their qualification. So personally, I'm a diploma nurse. It's we will call like diploma in general nursing. So I did my diploma from 2006 to 2010. It's a 3.5 years of program. So we have another BSc honors program also. But unfortunately, I cannot complete that one. But in India, it's too difficult to do such a honors program if we are working. So most of the candidates who are trying to get a job, especially in overseas, their aim will be to get a higher degree. At the same time, they can earn and they can take their family. So my suggestion, if we are getting any opportunity to upgrade their diploma, especially who completed the general diploma nursing, it's like a top-up program. I searched in the Google, a lot of honors BSc programs are ongoing, but as a newcomer, we are not sure if these colleges are accredited under the NMC, and it's available to join for the overseas nurses as well. So if we are providing any career guidance for the candidate who are coming different part of the country, it's very useful for them to upgrade their education and their qualification as well. These are the only thing that I can oversee here.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Thank you. Any other comments at all? No? Okay. Oh, Simon, yes.
Just wanted to thank the whole team for coming along this morning. So, Kirsty, Liam, see the wave coming in from the side of the screen there, Rajitha. Thank you so much for your presentation this morning. The thing I think I just want to highlight is that it's really important we stick with this for the long term. Quite a lot of hospitals up and down the country have done this kind of episodically or in response to a kind of staffing crisis. That's not the way of making a success of this type of program. You have to invest in this for all sorts of reasons for the longer term. And I think I'd also particularly like to note and thank Maureen for her contribution. And I think that goes to show that there is a real future, because Maureen came here, didn't she, Sharon, as a kind of a junior nurse, and has now progressed her career all the way up to a sister level and probably will go further, and now leads our Shared Decision-Making Council. And although she wasn't able to be with us this morning, her contribution in that space, I think, has been remarkable. And as I think Andy said in the chat, she captured it really, really well with a beautiful blend of all cultures. And I think that is probably the kind of sincerest tribute that we can pay to the programme and its success to date, and one that I hope we can continue to support going forward. So I just wanted to say well done to all the team.
Okay, thank you, and pass on our thanks to Maureen. I did like that phrase as well. I think it would benefit enormously from having Scots as well as English and Welsh, but never mind, you can't have everything in a single ward, I suppose. Right, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much in particular for the team that came and did the presentation. So back to me now. First, I should welcome Heidi. This is our first substantive in this post-substantively public board meeting. Got that the wrong way around, didn't I? Anyway, we're very welcome, Heidi. Second, just to say that we're being joined just after the break by Dr. Llewellyn, who's you'll know as one of the non-execs from Kettering, and you should know that her background was as a Director of Public Health in a major home county. And she's just going to talk a little bit, join us for a conversation about the inequalities data that we're beginning to produce, and she made a good contribution, as you would expect. It's her specialised mastermind subject, really. The other thing to say is, despite a number of frustrations and rather far longer than it should have done, we are interviewing for our non-exec director vacancies on the 10th of November. And the interview panel will be myself and Krishni Waring, unusually, I think, Ollie Newbold from NHSI, and Denise will be doing those interviews. So thank you to those for helping us with that. And I'm having conversations with people who are talking about being candidates now. So I'm optimistic about how that will proceed. And finally, from me, just to say that now that we have an ICS chair in post substantively in Naomi Eisenstadt, the process for ICS CEO is rolling along. And the interviews for that post will be held on, I think it's the 27th of October, anyway, 27th or 28th of October. And we should be shortlisting for that post next week. And again, I understand there are a number of applications. I have no idea of who they are at the moment. But that appointment, when made, should then allow some material changes in and development in the ICS appointments. And I'll just mention in the afternoon session about the fact that the ICS is looking to appoint probably up to 5 non-exec directors. So if people think that is an area they would like to look at or suits their skill mix or whatever, then they can talk to me later. So that's that from me. Simon.
Thanks, Alan. So a few things just to comment on this month. The first was last week was Organ Donation Week. Just want to thank everybody across the county who contributes to supporting that vital work. It literally changes lives. I had the privilege of listening to one volunteer who had sadly lost her daughter in Kettering and who joined the team to make sure that awareness of what people could do by having the conversations that were important, what benefit those could bring to others. She herself had just met the recipient of her daughter's donations, and it had really helped her, and she was enormously grateful for that opportunity. The conversation this year is the hashtag is #LeaveThemCertain, and I'd encourage everybody who hasn't yet signed up to have those conversations and sign up for the organ donation register. 2 things I think on the horizon for comment this month. The first is that the NHS has obviously had a very significant settlement for the second half of this year and for the years that move beyond this up to 24-25. And I think the kind of quite startling statistic is that £1 in every 3 of taxpayers' money now comes to the NHS, which when you reflect on that, it's quite a significant amount of what we pay in taxes being spent on the care that we will one day all need. I think that as a consequence, there naturally come expectations. And so I wanted to spend a bit of a moment on those 2 expectations. So the first is really around what we're going to deliver for patients, and the kind of call to arms this time has been around elective care. As we know, the pandemic exacerbated and dramatically worsened the waiting list position nationally. And as a consequence, we now have a really significant piece of work to do as a country to reclaim the position that we had, I think, almost got to take for granted a few years ago. What does that mean? So the asks are in the next 6 months that as a country, we eliminate the 104-week waits. We now have several thousand of our fellow citizens in that position. And that's going to require all of us to work together to do that. So although in Northamptonshire, we are in a fortunate position of not having waits of that length, there are other systems in the Midlands that do, and it's quite likely we're going to be asked to help with that position. And of course, the reason why we're going to be asked to help with that position is because the teams here operationally have done a stellar job at keeping going. And I want just to take a moment through you, Joe, I guess particularly, to thank all of the operational teams for the work that they've done in keeping going throughout the pandemic and beyond. We would not be in as fortunate position as we were if it were not for the collective efforts of all our operational teams. But we're not just here for Northamptonshire. As Alan, I think, sometimes observes, there is an N in NHS, and it's important that we respond to that level of challenge too. I'm not in a position to say much more about that at the moment, but it will be a subject we come back to, I suspect. I'm also really pleased today that we're going to start a conversation around theatre efficiencies. Probably one of the most important areas that's maybe from a public, even from a board perspective, sometimes least understood is how well we do in terms of our theatre efficiencies. And it's right that when the challenge of our time is to recover elective waiting lists, we publicly account for that. Other key challenges around performance that were recently promoted in the national announcements. The first was obviously to continue to make sure 62-day cancer performance was delivered. And the second was to stabilise our waiting lists. In other words, for them not to get worse than they are at the moment. Again, we start in a good position in that in Northamptonshire, but the challenges that we face around this are real in terms of keeping control of that going forward. The second thing that was talked about nationally was obviously the financial challenge. I don't really want to focus so much on half two. One reason for that is entirely pragmatic. As we sit here right now, the half two planning guidance has not yet been published, despite the fact that half two, for those who are watching the dates of these things, actually starts tomorrow. So we will be running an accelerated planning process into October to try and get to a place where we've got an answer to the questions that are still awaiting those answers. The point I really wanted to make here was half-year planning processes could risk distracting us from what actually is the bigger question, which is how do we get Northamptonshire to a sustainable financial position over the medium term? Now, what precisely the medium term is and the actions that we need to take in order to support that have still to be determined. But referencing back to Alan's point about ICS chief executive appointments and the formation of the ICS, clearly those leaders will be integral to helping shape the conversation around that. And we should be clear, the majority of the current financial problem in Northamptonshire sits fairly and squarely in the acute hospital space. And in responding to that challenge, we're going to have to ask ourselves three questions. Firstly, what can we do to improve our own lot? And there is a considerable amount that we will be needing to do that. Secondly, what is the conversation that we need to have with the system about what acute hospitals cost to run? We can't dodge that question. And to be fair to our system colleagues, John and I have had conversations in that vein. I think that I'm seeing a welcome change in tone towards a system-based focus in terms of the conversation around finances rather than an institutional or organisational based focus. And then finally, clearly, in terms of the longer term contribution, our clinical strategy has a significant focus in terms of helping us deliver that consolidation in a way that protects quality and delivery, but also addresses some of the financial challenges. So I would encourage us now really not just to think about half two, it's always very seductive to do that, but to actually think about the longer term. Finally, from me this month, it would be remiss not to publicly note and thank Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal for her visit to open the paediatric emergency department in Northampton, and for the time that she spent with staff who've made such a positive contribution in COVID. I think I'll say just two things about the visit. The first was it was great to be able to have the Princess Royal spend some time with Sister Donna, who was retiring after 45 years service to NGH. And if you're listening, Donna, we wish you all a very happy retirement, and we hope your last week was memorable. I think it was. And secondly, as Alan and I walked away from the paediatric emergency department, there was a spontaneous cheer because I think it really helped staff feel that their contribution was recognised. So on behalf of us all, I just wanted to thank the Princess Royal, the Lord Lieutenant, for their visit. It meant a lot to a lot of people. Thanks, Alan.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. I'll pause there for a minute. Are any questions or comments on anything Simon said or I said? David?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think actually you've answered my question in part, Simon, but it was to do with the piece you mentioned about the sustainable financial position. And, you know, my question was, well, what is a financial sustainable position? I think you answered it in the context of the system, that we've got to figure out how much it does in fact cost to run acute hospitals, because I have seen numbers coming out of the system which show huge deficit positions, which are quite frankly unrealistic. And, you know, sustainability isn't breaking even in that context. I've seen abstract numbers rather than numbers which reflect the true cost of delivering healthcare to the folks of Northamptonshire via acute hospitals. So I think more a comment than a question. I think that is the question that we have to answer, and I'm sure the financial strategy is going to go a long way to doing that. How much does it cost to run acutes in Northamptonshire?
And I think your question is exactly the right one, David. We haven't had that conversation, firstly, as a system before, and face the consequences of it. We need to pretty soon now, because otherwise we will just simply carry on in a version of what we are doing now. That's why the ICS is so important, because in actual fact, it changes the way in which we have that conversation. Instead of it being an adversarial or competitive conversation, we're actually partner board members around that table. We are the people who have to solve this problem together. It's nobody else that we can look at to do that for us. So I think the 2 points I'd make is, one, I think the CFO group, and John may wish to comment, are actually now really getting into the task of trying to unpick what it costs to run Northamptonshire as a system. And I would expect us to be having private board discussions on that in the not too distant future. And the second is that the ICB body, which Alan and I will probably be sitting around the table as partner members of, will be integral in helping agree that financial strategy that helps make us all sustainable going forward. But John, I think you wanted to come in there.
Thanks for that, Simon. So yes, absolutely. The focus of conversations, certainly since I've joined and moving forward, are going to be focused on really two things. One, what can we do within our hospitals to ensure that we're delivering as efficiently and productively as we might, and we've got a number of pieces of work in train to help us identify those areas and be able to focus those change programs. But that will certainly leave a rump of a gap, and you're quite right, David, to call out what sustainability in its general sense means. I'll be clear, from our oversight body's point of view, NHSEI, it means break even. and we have got some work to do with system colleagues and oversight bodies to work through that. The other big piece of work is specifically around programs of change across our system. There are 4 key work streams that cover the services that we provide across our providers, be it community care, but hospital care and primary care, and mental health as well. And we are working very collaboratively to ensure that we're able to both support those change initiatives from a shifting of resource point of view, but also from a challenge on, are we delivering ways in the most efficiently and productive way, so we can get the best use out of our kind of Northamptonshire pound, so to speak. So there is absolutely a focus on there. It's absolutely collegiate, and we see that being the route towards us getting to a more sustainable footing. Okay, thanks everybody. Heidi, Hospital Chief Exec's report, first one. You're very welcome. Here you go, please.
Thank you. Obviously there's a huge amount I could cover. I've had an incredible first month. But I just wanted to thank a few people. So I wanted to thank Eileen, obviously, for her leadership prior to me and a really helpful handover. But more importantly, I wanted to thank the executive team for a huge amount of support in my first few weeks. But importantly, the staff and the teams who are doing incredible work under immense pressure at the moment. And I've been out. One thing I wanted to focus on today is I've really tried to spend time getting out, really understanding what it is like to work at Northampton General and what it feels like to experience care. Because part of my role, obviously, is to make Northampton a better place to work, an even better place to work, and continue to strive to improve that, and an even better place to receive care. So what I would say is the conversations I've been having, you'll see in the report, I've been across many teams, but the conversations have been really authentic. They haven't been portraying a perfect picture. We've had really meaningful discussions about the challenges and therefore the opportunities they bring, but also the great work that is happening and recognising some of that. And actually, I'm not sure we shout about that enough. And so one of the things we've been talking, as Sam and I have been talking about a lot, is the communication and engagement and how we can work on that to strengthen that, to really make sure we're connecting with our teams as effectively as we can, particularly through a difficult time. So yeah, thanks to everybody. I've been all over. I didn't know people could get quite so passionate about an oven in the restaurant, for example, but genuinely understanding their passion even for what it's like to receive the food on the ward for patients and the calories patients are eating was really profound. So obviously met freedom to speak up and different teams. So yeah, some fabulous conversations. The other thing I'd really like to bring to the fore is tied to what Simon was just saying, that the different type of challenge we've got as leaders really means we need to have different conversations and build really strong relationships across the ICS. And I've been really fortunate spending some time with particularly Stuart Lackenby in social care to really think about one of our bigger challenges around discharges and delayed discharges. So some really, I say collaborative, but obviously that's quite a used word at the moment, but collaborative and really challenging around what value for money, how does it improve quality of care, patient experience. So some really broad and meaningful discussions about what is our collective role rather than our roles as individual organisations. So I'll come on the next item some work that I'll be taking forward with Stuart and some of the team at NGH. Obviously, there's continued pressure on ED, which we'll come to more in the performance report, but that is obviously impacting on staff's wellbeing, impacting on the experience of patients, which we'll see in some of the metrics. Got some really good OD work that's happening, and there's some work that Joe will cover around how we're trying to do some initiatives to obviously improve that, but there's still more to do, and obviously there's national pressures around that. But I think we really need to acknowledge that in the backdrop of those pressures, we've managed to keep elective work going. And for example, in July, we were first in the region for our 2-week wait and our 62-day performance. So that can't go unrecognised because obviously it's incredibly hard for teams at the moment. Some of the things that are really important on the positive note, celebrating some of the successes during the first month. Obviously, Simon's stolen my thunder around Her Royal Highness Princess Royal's visit, but Jo, extending my thanks. You know, Simon obviously spent a bit more time with her and really saw the impact that it had as you walked around, which I've heard lots about it since the day. So it was a real honour to meet her and for teams to experience that. The other thing which is important to note is our launch on the same day, actually, of our nursing and AHP strategy. So it was a real honour to walk around with Sharon and Emily to meet some of the teams and talk about some of the great work that's being done across that portfolio. The other area, which is a real demonstration of not only a great team within NGH but the system working, is that we've managed to retain our SNAP rating in stroke rating of A, which obviously that recognises the care that is provided by our stroke team, but that couldn't be done if there wasn't really collaborative working across the system as well, which Jo and Matt will know much more about over time. And we've also received a Penna Award for patient experience. Our urology team received that for working with men with lived experience of prostate cancer. So that's a real honour as well that we've received that. And finally, I was lucky enough to go to the Pride Awards. We had a stand there, and it's just a real recognition to the importance of the work our networks do. And Andre was really passionate about making sure we were represented across NGH, KGH and NHFT. So that was Jo and I went along on that Sunday, and Tracy came along too. So that was really good. So all in all, it's been an absolute honour to be here as Hospital Chief Exec. Obviously, there's lots to do, as Simon's been discussing. And my first two priority areas I'd probably like to point out is delayed discharges. So the work we are triggering and working with Matt and across the MDT to use it actually as a real opportunity to look at what's underpinning the delayed discharges we have at Northampton, both from an obvious flow perspective, but also what does it tell us about our culture? What does it tell us about accountability and advocacy of patients? So it's a real opportunity to think much more broadly about really approaching it from a multifaceted perspective rather than just the obvious. So that's one of the areas of focus. And the other area of focus that is very much something I've been concentrating on in my first month is maternity. It's a nationally pressured service, and it's something that I've spent quite a bit of time with Sharon and Matt and the team in maternity already to unpick what's happening there from the team's perspective. So that they're my kind of areas of priority, and I'll end on that, Alan.
Okay, thank you very much. Any comments or questions? No hands going up. Just give me a quick one, Heidi. Are there any issues arising from the fuel problems in the hospital from a staffing point of view, or patients or ambulances or anything?
So I haven't, we've talked about it quite a bit in terms of what we can do to realign working patterns for some of the teams, and they've discussed it at Silver around people working from home. I don't know if Jo or Matt want to come in. It hasn't become a really significant issue in terms of impacting on care as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you very much. Nobody else? Nope. Okay, thank you. And you still the Heidi show. You're going straight into the integrated performance report. You're going to run this. Let's be clear, we're looking for committee chairs and executives to only talk about the things they wish to bring to the board's attention. We're very comfortable with the delegated powers that committees have, and they should take those powers. This is not a place to tell a story of a committee meeting. This is very much about what do you wish to raise at the board, and in a sense, why? What is it that we're bringing to our attention? So Heidi's going to compare this show between the non-exec leads and the exec leads. Over to you, Heidi. Okay.
So before we go into the individual parts, I'd just like to pull out a few things really, some of which I've already covered slightly, is obviously the challenges at the front door in the ED continue. And this obviously is a picture of continued demand, but obviously a reduced bed base. One of the things that is a continued issue nationally and regionally is handover delays, and they obviously are starting to rise here at NGH. So that's something that ties into the piece of work I was just describing, working with Stuart and colleagues across the whole of NGH and primary care on our board rounds, what's some of the changes that Jo will cover internally to improve flow. So obviously the impact of the attendances at the front door are very much a reflection of what's happening within the hospital. So there is a significant amount of work through Icam and other projects, but there's equally a really key piece of work that I'm personally keen to keep pace, really do in a meaningful way. So Matt and I are going to oversee that on a weekly basis going forwards. The other thing I'd like to point out is obviously cancer performance. It can't go unnoticed that it's an improving picture, and we need to congratulate the teams on that for all of their hard work collectively. And our RTT performance is a continually improving picture. Obviously, Simon's alluded to the fact that there is obviously a bigger national challenge, but it's important to acknowledge the hard work and dedication that's continued through the pressure here at NGH. And finally, I wanted to again highlight the maternity pressures. It is something that we need to make sure we're focusing on from a safety perspective. And again, it is a regional and national challenge. So Sharon, Matt and I are making sure this is a real focus. So I will go straight into, conscious of your brief, which we will take up with full challenge, Alan, to only focus on exceptions and highlights. So we'll go straight to the Quality Safety Committee, which is Jill, to give us those exceptions and highlights, and then Matt and Sharon will support.
Thank you very much, Heidi. So the committee wanted me to highlight a number of things to the board, but thankfully, most of those are covered either in the agenda or in papers. But there are a couple of specifics. One is to recognise that we now have a complaints panel, which has met once, and I believe is meeting again today. And this has been set up in with regard to the recommendations from Baroness Cumberledge's report, which was called First Do No Harm. So it's very pleasing to report that that's been set up, and it will increase our scrutiny of complaints. So that's really good news. Second bit of good news is that one of the ongoing themes of our complaints is communication, and the PALS office is moving to the front of the hospital. And we hope that that will improve the communication to our visitors and patients, as hopefully maybe some of them will be getting to the coffee shop, etc. So we wanted to highlight that. We were disappointed to hear that there have been some issues around health information and IT. So there were some data bits missing from our reports, but looking at the IPR today, it seems that much of that might have been resolved because we've got a very comprehensive report. So fingers crossed that will be resolved going forward. Other than that, I don't think there's anything that I want to raise as from the committee chair perspective.
Thank you very much, Jill. Matt and Sharon, would you like to add anything before we take questions?
The only thing that I would like to add, Heidi, is our COVID response, and to give reassurance to the board that we continue to be absolutely focused on the COVID situation. The number of hospital-acquired cases is very low, but we are seeing higher numbers coming in from the community. But using our IPC BAF and our absolutely excellent infection prevention team, we're doing everything that we can do to mitigate there and to allow normal activity to continue in the organisation.
Thanks, Sharon.
The only other thing to echo, Hemant kindly attended on my behalf, but I understand that also particularly highlighted was the rapid progress with the academic strategy, and that's beginning to yield real dividends, not only in terms of the recruitment and retention of staff and the opportunities for patients, but in terms of sort of benefits realisation. Our joining with the University Hospitals of Leicester in partnership bids for the biomedical research centres and clinical research facilities. Those are sort of partnerships worth many tens of millions of pounds over the coming 5 years. So we're hoping that our investment in academia is going to pay off in many facets. And that's the only thing to add from the Quality Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add from that, I went to the feedback from the Royal College of Physicians. They will be writing to us, so we'll give you a more formal update. But it was incredibly positive feedback that there was a much improving picture of medical education. So they will be writing to us in the coming weeks. So Andy.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to publicly give my apologies for the delays in the data. I have written to all board colleagues to explain what I'm doing to address the situation, and can assure you that I'm very much seeking to address this.
Thanks, Andy, and I can confirm that we're having very real and live discussions about this, and there's really good communication between the teams, so it's not impacting on safety or anything like that. So, David.
Thank you, Heidi. Can you update us as to when the ITU, the intensive treatment unit, is going to open? Presumably this is going to be a large part of the capacity planning as we move into winter, isn't it? Because it is going to give us a lot more in terms of capacity in that respect.
Yeah, so I can give an update, but I don't know whether Simon or Stuart have got more up to. There is a delay. Simon or Stuart, have you? I know you've been in live conversations about this.
Yeah, I can step in there, Heidi. Halfway through writing you an email this morning, actually. So we know in the building industry at the moment, with all the pressures, lots of schemes are under threat and under risk, and we've been top of our list on this one, pushing it. So the latest date for us on this building is to hand over in December. So we just now work on the commissioning periods with Joe and the team about how we staff it and get familiarisation and get it ready for early part of the new year to see patients in there. But it is very difficult with some of our building contracts at the moment, whether it's delays on equipment, whether it's fuel shortages, whether it's COVID. So all our plans are quite fragile at the moment, but the latest plan just agreed this week with the directors of the principal contractor and their subcontractors is aiming for building completion in December.
But do we have penalties in the contract?
There are penalties in the contract, and they're not huge. And actually things like COVID and lack of materials would override those penalties, unfortunately. But with that in mind, the majority of all the equipment we've ordered was all pre-ordered with this in mind. So I'm confident they're doing everything they possibly can. They've increased shifts and hours on the build. We've been involved with the subcontractors now as well to make sure they're fully aware. I met with their directors, or Paul and I met with their directors last week. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that handover's as soon as possible.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
And just to obviously complement that, David, the winter plan, Joe will be able to provide more detail if needed, but the winter plan was working on handover in November, I believe, and therefore it is slightly delayed, but the model that we have that Andy has kindly started, which I'll thank him now for his and Joe's hard work on the winter plan, allows us to remodel and really look at what that means for kind of the impact of that. So we're working very closely as a team to make sure we think about what that means for operational pressures.
Thank you, Heidi.
Denise.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm not sure if I'm raising this at the right time or if I'm cutting across committees here, but I've got a couple of observations and a question. If I start with the question, and that's about the data again. It said, looking at never events, it said no data was received. Can we assume that that means there were no never events? Because it didn't actually say zero, it just said no data received. I think that's probably quite a quick answer.
Matt, do you want to put your hands quickly on
Yeah,
that?
correct. I think that's unfortunately technocratic language. There were none.
Right, okay, so no, never met. That's great. The couple of observations that I've got, and these have come up in different ways already. Yes, first looking at the from the performance side of things and the friends and family test for A&E, where it's already been acknowledged that there are issues. One of the notes that were made is that the issues that have come up relate to patients having concerns with communication, which Jill highlighted, related to attitude, behaviour and waiting times. Now, waiting times everyone's got, we acknowledge that it's a national thing, but we've got this issue of attitude and behaviour. And I think when we will be coming on later to look at the nursing and midwifery care excellence, which is there's a lot of really good news there, but one of the lowest scorers there. So one of the areas again in that where we've got most reds and most ambers relate to communication, and communication being sensitive to patients' needs. So I think we need to just think about what is that telling us, because there's a number of things triangulating here. And then the other thing that I just wanted to make an observation on was around the discharges, and I was really pleased, Heidi, to see that that's one of the things on your list, because the measure for patients discharged by midday, we don't seem to have made any progress over 2 years, and the focus in terms of the mitigations are entirely around transport. But I think if we've not made progress on that in 2 years, maybe we should be focusing on something more widely than transport. And I know that that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it again, it's an observation, I guess. So thank you very much.
So just on those briefly, and happy to speak in more detail, Denise, if it's helpful. On the patient experience and friends and family test, as you rightly say, this will be down to a number of factors. So, for example, some OD and support work is going into our A&E team, because some of this will inevitably be down to the pressures, but we need to make sure that the communication with patients continues to be what we'd expect from each other. And I've spent some time talking to teams and the divisional teams around our values and behaviours, and making sure we're leading by example, and supporting and questioning where this falls below the standard we would expect. So absolutely a priority. On the second point, as hopefully I tried to allude to, the approach to discharges needs to be fairly multifaceted. So some of it is cultural, risk appetite, some of it is a number of factors in terms of flow metrics, but there's a really meaningful piece of work with the system, with some of Matt's team, some of Sharon's team, AHPs, Liz Sargent, who's a national leader in discharge, working with us. So we've got a real opportunity, and it's something that I'm hugely committed to making sure that we turn it round in terms of making real progress. And some of it is about empowering our teams to actually be able to make decisions in a very different way than we do now. So hopefully you'll start to see a change. It's certainly something that I'm committed to.
That's great. Thanks, Heidi. Thank you.
Jill.
Thank you, and thanks to Denise for flagging up the friends and family results in A&E. We certainly discussed this in the quality committee, and for some time we've been looking at the continuity of care offered to patients in this very pressured environment. And on the back of that, David and I are doing a visit later today, just to get some further assurance of the quality committee, and we will be reporting back next time.
Thanks, Jill. I think it's a really important balance around staff wellbeing as well, which Anne and I have been talking about. So it's important we approach it from both aspects, really. So thank you. So we'll move on to, if there's no more questions, we'll move on to finance and performance. And as Rachel isn't here today, I'll hand straight to John.
Thank you, Heidi. Appreciated. So we met as a group finance and performance committee. A number of the items that were discussed are on the agenda, specifically reset report, IGR metrics, and winter modelling. So I proposed to leave that for those conversations. There were some concerns, as Andy has already referred to, around operational performance data that meant the conversations weren't as detailed as we'd like, but colleagues have already picked up and referred to the key performance challenges and successes that we've had over the recent period. I don't know, Joe, whether there's anything in particular you wanted to add to that point.
No, I just wanted to pick up, someone mentioned the handover issues in A&E, so I just wanted to talk about that. Happy to do that now, or wait until you finished.
Go for it now, and then I'll move on to the estates and finance element of the agenda.
Yes, we've had a rise in a significant rise in conveyances with patients with query COVID. That is what's causing us some operational logistical issues in A&E, because we only have a finite amount of spaces in A&E to unload patients who are query COVID. So we're working on different options around how we can improve the space in A&E to do that. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Joe. With regards to estates, we had a routine update around compliance and some papers around submitting a grant application to the public sector decarbonisation scheme. The reason I'm flagging it to the board is because we have submitted that application. It's non-committal. I think it's good news for the organisation. We'll be part of a competitive process to access a non-repayable grant. The numbers that we're talking about at the moment are circa £6 million, and that will be to allow us to replace and install kind of infrastructure equipment to reduce our carbon emissions using lower carbon technology. We will, of course, we have an obligation via the NHS target to become net zero emissions by 2040, and this will be a key enabler for us to be able to do that on top of the investment that's already been made to the estate. When we find out the success of that bid, we will of course need to develop a business case to go through an approval cycle. But just to flag to board members that bid has been submitted, it's non-committal, and the scale and the benefit that I feel it will make to the estate. Is there anything, Stuart, you wanted to add other than that bit?
Sorry, John. Thank you. You've obviously read that paper in detail. The bid goes in on the 6th of October. That's our deadline.
Apologies, I got my chronology slightly wrong.
But yeah, we are quietly confident we'll be successful this time round. But yeah, we will need to bring that paper back for approval to commit to the fund.
Thank you, Stuart. On the finance side, so summary of the financial position was presented by me. Just to give the board colleagues a heads up on where that is. So to the end of month 5, we have reported a deficit of 0.3 million. That's a deficit variance to plan of 0.6 million. The major driver for that overall is the movement in the conditions to access elective recovery fund monies, which is an allowable variance to plan. To date, that's a variance of 1.1 million, i.e. greater than our overall variance to plan. I should pick up the kind of financial manifestations of the challenges that have already been discussed around elective recovery and urgent care. So we continue to put more resource into our urgent care capacity. That's costing us about £1 million more than we had planned it to. That's to ensure that we have appropriate resilience at the front end to support senior decision making. Currently, those costs and those pressures are being offset by a reduced level of spending COVID compared to the peak of the pandemic. But overall, we are in line to deliver a financial performance as we had planned, aside from the elective recovery fund, which is an explainable and allowable variance to plan.
Thanks, John. Joe, is there anything you wanted to come in before we take questions?
Just to reference what you said, Heidi, about the transformation programme across urgent care. So we're in full flow delivering that programme now, and we're in our second Give It a Go week, testing some more programmes for the winter. But as you referenced in your update, Frailty Unit Move was the first of the key programmes for the transformation across urgent care, which has happened. And that will align to all the other work that you've referenced with board rounds and discharge processes. So it's good stuff, given the pressures.
Absolutely, it's great that we were able to continue that despite the pressure. So thanks to you for your leadership on that, Joe. So any questions, David?
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. Yeah, mentioned flow through the hospital, ambulance handover problems with discharge. The hospital's invested about £3 million, I think, in the Icam programme. We've also referenced the Icam programme, but what is the Icam programme actually delivering to Northampton General Hospital?
Joe, do you want
me to take that?
Yeah.
So David, one of the first agreed programmes for the frailty pillar was opening the frailty unit at NGH, which we've now moved into Eleanor Ward on the NGH site. And now we're improving the frailty experience for patients that come into A&E, who can now be transferred straight through to the frailty unit for treatment, assessment, and discharge quickly, so they could be assessed by the community teams in the frailty unit. And that was one of the, the key projects that we wanted to deliver before winter that we've done. We agreed that across the system as a key thing, and the same for KGH as well. And attached to frailty has been a whole frailty education programme, which the whole system has been involved in, improving not only the patients that come in terms of getting the right patients in, but so that we can manage patients better in the system. And we're hoping to reduce conveyances into A&E by 1%. And we're looking at those numbers at the minute. And hopefully in future board meetings, we'll be able to present those dashboards to show what we're delivering.
Yeah, I think that would be very useful. Yeah, that would be very useful at some stage, given the importance that's been placed on this particular initiative.
Yeah.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks, David. I think Simon also wants to come in on that question.
Thanks, Heidi. So I think, David, the first thing I'd say is this is the first system transformation programme that the whole system has actually agreed on. And that's actually probably one of its most signalled departures from what we've done before. Previously, we would have been trying to do something on our own and hoping that other people joined in. But this is genuinely something that everybody, all the boards have signed up to. So we, the CCG, the two unitary authorities and NHFT have all committed to make this a reality. Your question nonetheless is a good one. I mean, in very simple terms, if I put it most starkly, we've contributed over £5 million worth of funding to that programme in order to make it work. And given the fact that quite a lot of the conversations that have come up are around ICANN in either directly or indirectly, what I'd like to suggest is that between myself, Heidi, and the exec teams of both hospitals, we offer NEDs a seminar on ICAM to allow you to kind of kick the tires a bit, because it's going to infuse so much of our thinking. It feels more appropriate, rather than considering it through this committee or that committee. We give you the opportunity to have a kind of conversation about ICANN in its totality. And if that would be welcome for colleagues, Heidi and I will take an action to arrange it. I see nods around the table. And if we aim to do that before the next board, so by the time we come around next board in November, you are conversant with ICANN and what we're trying to achieve, because we could go through each of the pillars, talk about the flow and grip pillar, the frailty pillar, the discharge pillar. But in actual fact, that would take us the whole of this conversation that we've got time for today. And I think it's probably better that we give you and us together the opportunity to do that. So hopefully, David, that will give you and others, I saw some other nods, but if people would like that, we will arrange it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. So if there are no other questions for John and Joe, then I will move on to the group digital and hand over to Andy.
Thanks, Heidi. So key things from the Group Digital Hospital Committee. We had a deep dive on cybersecurity, and whilst there's never any room for complacency in that that area, we are performing pretty well, and the systems in place are pretty good. We also had an update on the progress for achieving the digital aspirant funding for the NGH EPR programme. Colleagues will know the process of getting national funding involves a series of hurdles, and we continue to go through those, but we've had some recent feedback from the regional team on the business case, and that continues to sort of work through that process. We did have a discussion around the laboratory system that is a joint arrangement between Northampton, Kettering and Leicester. Concerns about that. There has been some recent discussions with the supplier, and we've had a collective meeting about what's going to happen next to try and address some of the concerns there. And we've also talked, as we've talked about today, is around what we're doing regarding health intelligence, and this concept of a fire break, where we will, in effect, focus on establishing a core set of data that will be reported on through Power BI. And I'm pleased to say that the advert for a group head of health intelligence went out yesterday. So look forward to some good applications there.
Thanks, Andy. Any questions for Andy? No? Thanks for all your work on it, Andy, and some really good communication about the fire break with teams. So moving on to CPC, which I'll hand straight to Simon, given that Rachel's not here.
Thanks, Heidi. So a couple of points to make here. First is on the agenda today is the first of the strategies that we're going to start bringing back. So we're now in delivery mode. It will be a chance for the board today to consider the progress that we've made on implementing our people plan. And I think there's a lot to talk about there, both what's happened and what's been achieved, but also some of the things that we really need to do to embed making people's lives a little bit easier in their day-to-day would be the theme I would highlight. Looking forward, I'm expecting the CPC, as it considers its meetings in the upcoming months, just to give a bit of a plug for that, to do two things. One is to start to consider in quite some detail the results of the People Pulse survey. We had a really great response rate to that for a first go, and I think it's really important that we now, as organisations and as a group, consider what our staff are telling us and what we're going to do about it. The other, of course, will be, I will be expecting the CPC in its meeting later this month to start picking up the planning guidance and what that's likely to mean. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions for Simon? No, and I would just acknowledge that I have gone slightly out of order, so my sincere apologies. I'll come to David for audit committee. So apologies, David.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Yeah, indeed, the audit committee did meet on Tuesday of this week. And just to remind the board, the audit committee is a quarterly committee, and its mandate is to seek assurance that effective systems of integrated governance, risk management, and internal controls are in place across the organisation. The meeting on Tuesday did not recommend any items for board approval. However, there were a couple of items which the committee requested that the board was cited upon. The first of those relates to the board assurance framework, where the committee was encouraged by the formulation of group risks in a similar form to the BAF for the trust. The committee did, however, feel that a number of principal risks at the group level required further review in terms of articulation, for example, with mapping of risks from the trust's risk register. Committee also wanted to emphasise to the board that, given its high public profile at present, attention is being paid to fraud prevention. It's being taken very seriously. Committee also continues to look at what we term as maverick procurement transactions, whereby the trust has been committed to make expenditures without going through due process. And the committee is really looking at a, shall we say, a zero tolerance in this respect. Finally, and as was committed at the extraordinary board meeting earlier this month that reviewed the external auditor's annual report, a lessons learned paper was presented by John, the group director of finance, and corrective action, which was outlined in that report, will be reviewed by the committee in 6 months' time. And further to note that at the December meeting, we will be doing some deep dives. Andy has mentioned cyber security at the Group Digital Hospital Committee. We'll also be doing a deep dive at the Hospital Audit Committee into cyber security and also into clinical audits. So that's the report from the Audit Committee, Heidi. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. John, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Heidi. So just a little bit more detail on that the Maverick transaction and waiver type issue. So this was an issue that was flagged and raised at my request. We are in a process for completeness. This is essentially where colleagues haven't complied with our internal control processes for procuring things like advanced purchase orders, requisitions, etc., prior to kind of committing expenditure on goods. So this isn't a fraud issue. This is a compliance with internal control process issue. I'm comfortable, having seen the position that we were in a number of years ago, that there have been significant steps and progress to improve our performance here. However, as David has outlined, we have a process for a reason, and we should be seeking full and complete compliance with those processes. I think as part of our refocus and retightening of governance, moving from an emergency response to the pandemic, this will form part of that kind of retightening of governance and compliance, and I'll work closely with the committee to ensure that we are both providing meaningful challenge and support in this area.
Thanks, John, really helpful. As there's no questions, we'll move on to Anne for the People Committee, and then over to Mark.
Thank you very much, Heidi. So the committee first of all discussed medical education, and we heard that improvements had been made in our GMC Junior Doctor Survey, which was really encouraging to hear. We still have quite a lot of work to do, but we do feel it's going in the right direction, and the two trusts are going to be sharing their learning. We reviewed the plans regarding nursing, including recruitment, and a lessons learned report was shared by Kettering regarding the international recruitment programme, and their nurses didn't have such a great experience in contrast to what we heard earlier. So we heard about what happened in terms of their poor experience, the action that was taken, and the positive impact those actions had on the nurses. And the important takeaway was that we're sharing that learning across the group and the system to make sure that we do improve the experience of those international nurses. Simon's already talked about the People Pulse Survey, which we had good response rate. We heard about the National Staff Survey and plans for our winter vaccination programme, and also current outcomes on our EDI strategy. In terms of our people performance, the largest area of concern for us was regarding our absence position, which is trending above target despite all the really good initiatives that have been put in place. So we've commissioned a further breakdown as to the reasons for absence, and also some benchmarking information. And we're hoping to get some more insights into that at a further meeting. So high absence, along with medical vacancies, which are impacting on our temporary staffing position, do remain key concerns for the committee. And lastly, we did have a discussion on our metrics for the committee and the board, and we're hoping to conclude that this month. So that was all I wanted to report. Mark, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Anne. Just a couple of bits from me in terms of potential risks and things that we're working on that I think bringing to the board's attention is worthwhile. So one is in relation to the mandatory requirement for a COVID vaccination for NHS. Consultation is currently out and closes on the 22nd of October. And obviously we're looking in the background as to what implications that may have for us as a hospital. The second element is that of the National Pay Award and any potential industrial action that may come from that. We know that our trade union colleagues are balloting members at the moment in regards to whether industrial action should or should not be taken. So we're also monitoring that very closely as a second area of risk. But thirdly, a really important and a happy moment to stop on in terms of celebration. Simon rightly reminds us it's October tomorrow, and October is Black History Month. And we have a large set of events planned here in our hospital on the 18th of October, which we'll be publicising in the next week. And we very much hope board colleagues can join that along with members of the public who may be watching. So really exciting agenda set for the 18th to celebrate Black History Month. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne and Mark. Any questions? No, the only thing I wanted to pull out was, as you referred to and Simon's referred to, the importance of the pulse survey. It gives us a real opportunity to really work collectively on knowing how our teams are feeling and therefore what our leadership ask is in that space. And so it gives us a really wealth of information, which we've already started to discuss. So thanks to Mark and the team on that. So I'll hand over to Andy now for a discussion on the proposed metrics.
I'll pick this one up.
Okay, brilliant.
We're running a little bit late, so if you want a coffee break at all, you'll have to speak very quickly on this one. There isn't really a question in Andy's report. I just want to make the point that what you can see is clearly wide variation in the things that come to the two trust boards and indeed other trust boards. And we really do need to find a way to focus on this and make sure that we can produce an integrated governance report, not two reports and that just simply follow each other. We are a group and we should be able to think about this. I also think it's very important that we get it into our minds that less is more here. This is about what comes to the board. It's not about what comes to committees. There will be a hierarchy here and there will be far more information that goes to operational managers below that. It should also, as Andy said in an earlier part of the IGR about the BI, business BI process, which there will be training for in due course when that comes in to allow anybody who wants to drill in to drill in. But it's pretty much a fact that if you give boards too much information, then it becomes useless. And we need to focus this information on the things that if the board looks at those facts, changed from time to time and supplemented with special issues, surely, but then the board has a clear understanding of how well the hospital is running. Each committee will no doubt have a better understanding, and we're comfortable with the delegated powers to committees, and we're comfortable that we can trust our chairs and our executive directors to take it forward and to bring to our attention anything they have to bring to our attention. But it is important that boards learn to focus on the key issues before them. So I've stolen your thunder a bit, Andy, but and as it stands at 57, it's too many. I'm looking for a number that starts with a 4. And I'm looking for committees to come back and really think carefully of the coming month or so about what it is that they would routinely say. If you see this board, then you understand exactly what's going on. I think the other advantage of far fewer data items in the report is the board can expect much better descriptive narratives in the SPC chart boxes about what it is that those things are telling us. And we should realistically be focusing on those things in which we are making interventions. There's no point in giving us a series of SPC charts which simply show random variation because nobody's doing anything to alter it. So we need to think really carefully about how we take this forward and get into the less is more state of mind. So having stolen your thunder, Andy, on you go.
Yeah, well, I think there's not really much more to say, Alan, in as much as I just thank colleagues for the good conversations we've had through the committees. As discussed then, some committees are still to come back with their deliberations, and I will come back to CPC in October with a first stab at trying to coalesce all those different conversations that we've had, and then we'll work that through into the Power BI and the reports over the next reporting cycle.
And I think we're looking for, at the end of your report, it says we're looking for a first integrated IGR in January.
That's right, yes.
It would be nice if it was earlier, but I fully recognise the problems you're having with the data and the fire break and everything else. Anybody want to comment or question that as we move forward, or take a different view at what we're trying to do here? No? Good. Okay, thank you very much. I have 11:04 on my diary, on my clock. If we could be back at 11:12 to take the next bit. You now have a short break. Enjoy your coffee.
Morning, Lise. Thanks for joining us.
That's all right.
It's a good discussion yesterday. I'm looking forward to more of the same today. I really enjoyed your exegesis of health inequalities.
It's how much do you say in 5 minutes rather than kind of half an hour, 3 hours, whatever. But yeah.
Anyway, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
No problems. Hi, Joe. How are you? Well, I've had better days. Weeks. That good. I completed the run at Leeds. Did the half marathon. Yay. Just suffered a bit with the feet. The feet are fine. It's the knee and the elbow, which I hurt when I fell. But never mind. You fell? I did, yeah. At the halfway point. So, yeah. Picked myself up back up again with the help of Karen and completed it. So, well done. Good fun, apart from that. We got almost £2,000 in sponsorship, so did really well.
Brilliant.
And the other team had something similar. So I think between us all, we've got about 4,000 towards the robot. So it's good stuff.
Please, how you fixed for time? Because I can move the bit about inequalities up to the top of this section, or I can just let it run. It's the same as yesterday. It's elective reset and recovery, then theatre efficiencies, then inequalities, which means you run to 11:40, 11:50 before we finish that. All right?
That's okay.
Nothing better to do, in other words. Okay, fair. Nice to see you back in the country. Simon, do you feel very smug at having an electric car at this point?
I do, yes. And even smugger about the fact that it's a shame Lisa Janev's not here, that it's actually working now and correct volumes of heat and cold. Yeah. I felt quite smug plugging mine in yesterday and thinking it saves queuing, isn't it? I'm sure something will go wrong. There'll be some electricity crisis at some point, and we'll all wish we have petrol. Anyway, how are we doing? 11:12 we are. Okay, we're off again. You'll see that Dr. Leslie Llewellyn is with us somewhere on the screen, who is an ex-director of public health and therefore will be just joining the conversation about the health inequalities data. Lisa has enough time, so we'll go through it in the agenda, in the way it's on the agenda. So elective reset and recovery, which is Andy and Joe, and then theatre efficiencies, and then we'll come to the health inequalities. Who's leading this one, Andy or Joe?
So I'll do the reset, Chair. So just take the paper as read and just counter through just quickly 3 things. RTT, just want everyone to keep noting the progress around RTT. and we're on trajectory to clear our 52-week waits as planned. We continue to deliver against our outpatient targets, particularly the virtual target of 25%, which is good, although note that we are seeing increased attendances on site now. We still have some challenges around electives, particularly around the challenge of COVID constraints, but there was some new guidance that's come out yesterday, and I'm just waiting on the IPC team coming back to Sharon, Matt and I about how we can use that guidance to improve our theatre throughput, which obviously we'll talk about shortly as well. So just note broadly on plan, but there are still some challenges that we're working through, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, any comments on that? Elective reset. It's obviously a big issue for us, big issue nationally, but we have a good plan in place, and we are well placed compared to everybody else. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be working extremely hard. And as Simon said at the beginning, there's an N in NHS, so we will be helping, almost certainly helping out our colleagues to the north in Leicester. Any comments at all on that paper? Nope. Jolly good. Okay, theatre efficiencies now. Theatres tend to be a little bit of a black hole in the NHS. You paint a red line on the floor and say nobody else can come in, and sort of hide what's going on a little bit. So I think it's important, this is an NHSI initiative, to look at theatre efficiency. It's clearly our biggest capital asset. It's our most expensive thing that we do. And the usage of it becomes very, very important, particularly in relation to elective recovery. So, theatre usage, over to you guys. Are we doing this?
Yeah, so we'll do a bit of a double act. So you'll see in the pack the information about theatre efficiencies is available. And this is a conclusion of some work that's been done on improving the way that theatres are reported across the group. And just a bit on definitions just to start off with, and you'll see there's 4 measures that are important for model hospital and are reported. So touch time utilisation, late starts, early starts, and intercase downtime. And there's a description in the report that explains what those elements are. It's worth noting that those definitions are quite precise in model hospital, and that allows us to compare ourselves against other hospitals around the country. And you'll see in the report there is an extract from model hospital showing that Kettering and Northampton hospitals are certainly not in the 3rd or 4th quartile, which is where we should aim for. And you'll see in the report there's a target for 85% utilisation across the piece. So the graphs, Joe, if you want to talk to the various productivity changes that have been made over the last few months.
Yes, so we've both got theatre productivity plans in place now, looking at improving obviously the visibility and quality of the data that we have, but focusing on how we can reduce late starts, how we can increase the number of patients going through each list, and how we can reduce early finishes on the list, how we can improve, importantly, the pre-op assessment process, so we reduce the cancellations on the day, and how we can communicate better with patients to reduce DNAs as well. I think just to note that we are, both sides are having issues around theatre staff vacancies and sickness, which is obviously playing a part in our ability to be more productive in theatres. However, we're working on all of those things with the HR team and others at the moment. But in terms of both sites, in particular NGH, we have reduced our late starts. We know we've got a lot of opportunity, as Simon referenced earlier, to improve, particularly with the amount of patients we can get through on lists, and hopefully the new guidance will help us bring more patients through on theatre lists as well. So those are the sort of key things I wanted to highlight, Andy.
So you'll see in the concluding pack the number of stuff that's happening. As Joe said, there's some time and motion type studies that are taking place. There's some improvements to the dashboards that are there, and as Joe said, my pre-op is really well utilised in Northampton, and we're looking to see how that can be that technology, or if not, those principles are applied across the group.
Okay, where are we? David, and then, well, David first, and we'll see where else comes up. David.
Thank you very much, Alan. Maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe this is a non-exact question, but it would seem to me that one of the most significant variables concerning productivity in an operating theatre is the surgeon who's doing the operation, and how, I'll be careful of my words here, how quickly he does that. You know, I'm sure if you take orthopedic surgeons who do hip replacements, one of them can do it in an hour, another one can do it in 2 hours. Why don't I see anything mentioned about surgeon productivity here?
Let's gather that thought. I'll come to Matt. There are some interesting arguments about times for operations and whether you'd like a surgeon who takes 2 hours to be made to do it faster. But let's come to Denise and then Anne, and then we'll pick up on the general questions.
Yeah, thanks very much. Interestingly, my first question was going to be pretty well the same as David, so I'll leave that out there. I was also interested in understanding what is the scale of the DNAs and cancellations on the day that we have. You know, is that a major thing or of less impact?
Okay, Anne.
So yeah, I was just picking up on health and well-being because I know that theatre staff are really overworked at the moment and pressure is going to be increasing on them. I don't know if you read in the HSJ about the letter the chief execs wrote from Brighton University Sussex Hospital Trust about unsafe theatres, overworked staff. Obviously, we don't want to get into that position, but you know, I do want to be reassured that we are going to be putting plans in place to support our theatre staff, because obviously, you know, mistakes happen as well, serious incidents go up. So I think we just need to be, I know it's on your presentation, but I'd like to hear a lot more about what we're doing in that area. Thank you.
Thanks. I think too, there was an interesting conversation at Kettering yesterday, and two things I think they might just flag up from that. One is that you have to be just as wary of late finishes as early finishes, particularly if they occur persistently. And those two trusts, which are claiming 125% utilisation of theatre, need to be looked at really quite carefully in the graph. But also the importance of making sure, from a quality point of view, that the WHO guidelines are being pursued when the team comes together. So I know Andy's aware of that and the issue of data specifics, but even if the data in Model Hospital is needle to skin time, I think there's something in there about WHO guidelines and making sure that we are certain that all our theatres and all our patients are going through those guideline checks. So, Matt, would you like to come back and then we'll come to Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I would. I think a really interesting discussion and points well made. And absolutely, David and others, the pace at which a surgeon works affects the productivity of the list. It is not perhaps the primary driver of the productivity that one might imagine. The turnaround time between cases, whether the portering, the pace at which an anaesthetist works, the ODP, all of these are important variables, and to look to one item only will be to neglect the lion's share of the opportunity. It really is an area where proper multidisciplinary team working is essential, both for productivity and safety. I'm really pleased that Alan linked this discussion to the WHO guidelines, because again, productivity and safety must go hand in hand, and they do. A well-run theatre is productive and it is safe. And I would just call to mind for colleagues the cluster of never events that we had, predominantly in theatres, as we, with all good intentions, desperately attempted to clear backlogs between COVID's wave 1 and 2, and we learned some real lessons about the importance of the effectiveness of the team working and the investment in that in all our recovery and reset plans. None of that, I would have to say, as a surgeon who is doing his best to contribute to the recovery effort when I'm not doing the day job. When I'm in my comfort zone, I would have to say, not being a relative constant when I turn up at the list, there is significant variation in the number of cases I can do for all the other reasons that we've talked about. I'm really glad that there are new IPC guidance, and that I hope that our interpretation and application of those does allow us to improve our productivity in theatres, because I have to say the number of late cancellations, which prior to COVID, we'd have been able to backfill at short notice with patients desperate to come in and have their surgery. And we cannot do that because in the way that we used to, because of the need currently to get IPC clearance. It is a subject close to my heart, and I'm really happy to pick up offline with anybody any further discussions on the topic, but I won't hog any more of the meeting. Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify, Matt, what you're on about there, the current guidelines, I think, require any patient coming in electively to be 14 days pretty much self-isolating, and the last 3 days pretty much living like a hermit. So it's very difficult to bring people in suddenly. Nevertheless, having commented on the graphs, I probably should say, look, Northampton is pretty near the bottom of that graph, and there's a lot to be done in that area, and exposing the data is a good start, but it won't be enough. Joe's nodding helpfully. Heidi and then Simon, please.
And so it's just really briefly to David's point, really on as Matt said, I think it's important we understand, because equally sometimes a quick surgeon might not necessarily be what we want. So I think it's really a really important piece of work to unpick, is the variation in times, or is the variation in whatever metric we're looking at warranted, or is it something we need to understand more now, whether that's from an efficiency perspective or whether that's from a safety perspective. So I think it's a really important piece around understanding what's happening in theatres and what does that tell us about a number of factors. So, you know, sometimes there's warranted variation because of the type of patients, for example.
Thanks, Heidi. We will be coming back to this. It's going to be a regular feature, I think, as we focus on the efficiency of this. I'll come to Andy first, and then I'll go to Simon, and then we'll move on to the inequalities bit. Andy.
Yeah, just to add, in Model Hospital allows us to drill through by specialty. So, you know, to answer some of the questions around how you can look into that in more detail. And equally, I'd add the theatres dashboards that's available regularly to our service colleagues can drill down in a number of ways and look at DNAs, consultants, etc. So as we've said, the important thing here is we've now improved the way that we're surfacing the data, and that will help you know, prompt the discussions in the right place.
Okay, Simon.
Thanks, Alan. So a few thoughts from me. So the first is welcome the work that's been done on this, and as Alan says, this is the new lingua franca of the world, given the elective waiting list challenge nationally. So I would really, linking it to the conversation we had about IGR reports, this hasn't been a feature of IGR reports pretty much anywhere in the NHS, really. It's not something that people commonly report on in open conversation. But I think given the waiting list challenge, it's right that we do so. And I'd invite committees, as they go through their deliberations around what metrics should they be looking at, to pay attention to this, because this is something that you may not have thought about before because you haven't seen it, but I would say now is one of the really important things for us to focus on. From a policy point of view, if that were not strength enough in the argument, I would expect ERF payouts probably to start to be linked to this. So I think there will be incentives put in the system for us to demonstrate how we are improving. And as Alan's rightly said, and I completely agree with, leaving aside individual surgeon variation for a second, the evidence would suggest that there's considerable room for us to improve. That in itself is really quite important, isn't it? Because as a healthcare system in Northamptonshire, we spend about £35 million, more than many other systems do in the independent sector. You often ask me in these conversations, are we making good use of the independent sector? And my answer is always pretty much versions of yes, we are. But in actual fact, one of the things in which we can recycle money positively in a resource-constrained environment, given some of the financial challenges I talked about earlier, is to do better here. And one of the reasons why we don't is because we're not as productive as potentially we could be. Last point, we're coming together tomorrow on the clinical strategy. So I'd invite you to remember this data, those of you who are attending that day tomorrow, and think this: are we being as bold as we need to be in terms of some of the solutions that we're proposing for our surgical specialties to really make sure that that elective capacity that we talk about is protected? That would be the question. I'm not suggesting we get into that today, but just as you come around some of the ideas that colleagues are putting forward, we really do need to think about that. Tell you a story from Croydon, that well-known borough in London. One of the things that it did was it bricked up access to part of its facilities and completely ring-fenced them for surgical specialties. It decided it's just going to take the hit. This is a bit of a metaphor. And one of the things that it done is that surgical productivity has gone up through the roof because it has completely isolated it from the rest of the hospital. It's a picture. Do we need to be doing more of the same? More of that anon tomorrow. So food for us all to think about, and thanks for the work thus far.
Mark.
Thank you, Alan. I thought it was important to pick up Anne's question too in relation to health and wellbeing of staff in that particular area in our theatre department. So the answer to the question is absolutely, and they were our first port of call almost from an OD and a restoration and recovery perspective. And that dialogue continues in terms of understanding the pressures that those individuals faced, having supported our expanded ITU capacity during the COVID pandemic, and now obviously supporting the elective recovery. So we keep on with that work, and we're in very close contact with them.
Thank you. Nobody else, no. I think too, when you're thinking tomorrow and at a clinical conference, one of the thoughts I have all the time about the clinical strategy is, would it pass the ICS board test? In other words, is it just about more of us and not about how to intelligently think about the role of primary care, community care, and alternative facilities? So taking up the issue of bricking up entrances and separating out elective surgery hubs, which has been a good idea for quite a long time. We might also think about whether there are other places in the county which either belong to a health service or could belong to a health service, where we could develop some high volume, low complexity kind of procedures, of which there are plenty in the health service. So just think about it when you're on those tables tomorrow and pushing people for, really, have you thought about alternative ways of doing these things and better ways of delivering it, as well as driving people forward on what they mean by centres of excellence. Are you really imagining a centre of excellence or just something a bit better? So, any other thoughts on that? No. Sadly, Dr. Llewellyn has suffered a power cut somewhere in wherever she is. And so in order to give her a little chance to come back, I'm going to move to winter modelling. And then we'll come back to the inequalities. I won't forget it, because I personally think it is extremely important that we do that. And I'm sure others do, because I know that the non-exec directors in their away day asked for a whole section on inequalities and the role of acute hospitals at their next away day. So we will be obviously ramping up the analysis of this kind of thing. Anyway, winter modelling. So it's back to the Andy and Joe show. And take us through winter modelling, please.
Thanks, Alan. So this is a pack that many colleagues will be familiar with as we've been through the committees. I'll hand over to Joe to do the introduction, and I will talk to you through the model just to outline how it works.
Moving slides, Andy.
Okay, yeah, well, it sort of jumps straight into the explanation about the model, Joe.
Okay, well, as Andy says, or quotes here, all models are wrong, but some are useful, which is how we've designed this one. Switch to the next slide, just so I can
There you go.
Okay, all right. So obviously we'll take any questions and get into the detail for everyone, but the bed modelling parameters that we have used for this model are, as you can see on the left, in terms of attendances to A&E relative to the 2019 calendar year, admissions not via ED, conversion rate, length of stay, medical, surgical admissions, and so on. And we've worked alongside these and modelled various scenarios and looked in detail. It was me, Andy, and Faye, but thanks to Andy, because this has taken a lot of effort to really get into the detail and work through different scenarios and what different scenarios mean. And we've played about with a lot of parameters in a lot of different ways to get to where we think might be a reasonable position around this model.
Thanks, Joe. So if I just try and explain this schematic, if you can imagine a funnel in at the front door of ED. So this is around the attendances relative to the 2019 calendar year. As Joe said, 2020 isn't a good year to base a model on, and what we've seen is 2019 and 2021 have got a similar profile. So this gives us some confidence that we're modelling the right level of demand. There's also some admissions that are not via ED, direct referrals, etc. If you apply the conversion rate of the attendances, then you get total ED admissions. Some of those are dealt with on the day and don't result in a bed being used. And so there's a percentage of those that you can apply to the model and then split between the three divisions. Surgery and WCOH have got a relatively fixed length of stay over the course of a year. Medicine varies quite dramatically during the course of the year, and that has a massive impact on the number of beds required. So in the model, there's actually variation allowed for length of stay per month as we go along. When you apply those things, that results in a number of beds required, and you subtract that off the bed stock and have a gross bed deficit or surplus, and that's the number of beds that's available on a daily basis. Once we know that, we then apply the various schemes that Joe will talk about later, and that ends up with our net bed deficit and surplus. And the different viabilities of the schemes will determine how confident we are on meeting that gap. So there's a number of assumptions in the model. So 90% occupancy. The length of stay is based on actuals between April and July. At the point of doing the model, there was only partial data for August and then estimated data for the rest of the year, but based on historical information. And a number of schemes that are already in place are already taken into account. So we're not double counting when it comes to the home monitoring, for example. And this is the result. Joe, I'll hand over to you to talk about the net and gross positions.
Okay, so when we applied all those parameters that we've just briefly talked about, the likely case for the gross bed prediction would be from March 2022, would be that we'd have a bed deficit of minus 47 beds. As Andy referenced, we have got some green and amber schemes. The impact of those schemes, so the transformation program that I referenced earlier through NIBEVN, same-day emergency care, and reducing our length of stay, which works around all the board round processes that Heidi and Matt are leading on with Sharon. Then applying those schemes would result in a net bed deficit of minus 30 in March 2022.
So that was the adult scheme. There's also been some work done on pediatrics, which I'll bring it to the next page. There we go.
Yes, so we were given parameters to work within around pediatrics from NHSI, and we had to work around an assumption of a 50% increase in RSV. For NGH, that would result in us needing a total of 38 beds to support not just RSV, but the likely demand in pediatrics through winter. We're in a fortunate position to be able to open 43 beds by moving our paediatric assessment unit into the paediatric hub on site. We have assumed that we will continue with our paediatric oncology work because those patients would only come in as an emergency if we didn't make sure that they got their treatment. And we did assume that we would obviously cancel some paediatric elective work. And our assumptions remain that in terms of those patients that need level 3 transfer, that would still happen. So that was our net position around paediatrics, was that we'd be okay, and that we are working alongside KGH as well on pathways across the system to work around the paediatric demand, so that we can make sure that both sites are safe as we go through winter. In terms of the elective position, basically this slide is just really summarising the position that both organisations are on track to maintain elective activity as we speak. And at NGH, we're on track to clear the 52-week position, as I've already referenced. But clearly, as we move through winter, and as Simon has said, use of the independent sector will likely increase. And we've got all the other positions around the system to think about in terms of those patients that are waiting at Leicester and so on. But clearly there will be discussions and decisions to make around elective activity if some of this likely position happens as we move forward. And in terms of critical care, we've already spoken about the critical care unit and the likely opening date for that. That will provide us with slightly more capacity and ability to keep using our theatres. But we are making an assumption that the SOPs and the external transfer process continues as normal, but what we don't know is the impact of COVID and flu and other winter bugs and what that is likely to mean for critical care capacity as we move forward. And then the last slide was just, the next slide was just looking at the risks, issues and mitigations around those. I'm not proposing to go through those in detail, but clearly the risks, as you would expect, around the impact of COVID, the impact of staffing, and the position we find ourselves in now with issues around staff isolation and the pandemic, and around managing all our critical care patients through the system. So I'll not propose to go through that in detail, but happy to take any questions on that one.
Okay. Look, it's clearly going to be an extremely difficult winter. If there's one message, it's get a needle stuck in your arm for everything that's on offer, whether that's flu or COVID or everything else. Questions and comments, please. David and then Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things, and it's great to see us doing capacity planning in this way. It's a huge step forward, I think. You say target occupancy, just a couple of points. You say target occupancy is 90%. I mean, we've been led to believe, well, since I've been in NED, that 85% occupancy means a safe hospital. So 90% occupancy means not such a safe hospital. So why the difference between 85 and 90, or is it the new standard? I don't know. My second point would be around a comment that's made on page 153. And this is assumptions. And one of the assumptions for NGH is home monitoring for COVID and respiratory patients using Doppler is continued as business as usual, which is absolutely brilliant. This is the virtual ward, basically. How many patients have we rolled Doppler out to at this moment in time? They would be my two questions.
Okay, let's gather some questions and comments, give people time to answer the specifics. Jill.
Thank you. So to echo David's words, great piece of work and fabulous to see it across the group. Lots of emphasis on what we can do as two acute hospitals. And Heidi told us earlier, one of her priorities is to improve discharge. But there isn't any mention, particularly in the risk section, around our partners. So we are very reliant in relation to super and super stranded patients on our partners, i.e. social care and their capacity, and secondly, community nursing. Now, I heard yesterday in the end of life delivery board that community nursing referrals are up by 25%, and they are turning referrals down. Now, this is unheard of in community nursing world. So we've got some real pressures in relation to getting patients out And what we all know is that if patients stay in hospital inappropriately, they become deconditioned, and then it becomes even more difficult to discharge them. So that was one of my major questions, and also a request that it be one of the risks, please.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Matt and then Simon, if no other hands go up.
Just in relation to Doppler, David, at any one time, we might have, currently, predominantly, we've been using it to reduce the need to admit patients with sort of moderately severe COVID, and also for some to avoid asthma admissions in particular. And we managed to keep out nearly a ward's worth at best. I've agreed with Joe to give a day a week to Fiona McCann to provide clinical leadership on that, and spoken to Andy about it only yesterday to make sure we've got enough clinical system support, so that, because we think that there are other niches, particularly around heart failure and frailty, but others broadly, where we could possibly get up to a ward and a half towards 2 wards if we really go for it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Simon.
Thanks. Great questions and really good debate. So firstly, thanks, as I think Heidi said in the chat, to everybody who's contributed to getting our understanding to this point. It's good to see, and it's good to be seeing it comparably. I should also say, in the spirit of system-based working, we've shared this model with system colleagues, and they have accepted it as the one version of the truth that is the position. Just to deal with a couple of points. So occupancy first, David, you asked about it. So occupancy is one of those dark arts, but broadly speaking, the stochastic simulations show that for every percentage above 85%, the number of days that a hospital experiences duress go up. So while there is no absolutely empirically demonstrable level of occupancy that would say a hospital becomes safe or unsafe, what you can correlate it to is the number of days which you go into duress. That duress is caused by the resilience of the hospital. Very simply, the fewer beds you have to respond to surges in demand, the more likely you are to see flow issues in A&E, because you can't keep the flow smooth. So that's the reason why occupancy is used as such a sentinel indicator, and why we strive to drive it down. In truth, across the NHS, occupancy has been inching upwards for all the reasons that we know and understand, that are not just to do with Northamptonshire, but are to do with some of the issues around care. On the points that I think Jill was making about out-of-hospital partners, you're completely correct, Jill. I am more confident than I have been in the past of our internal grip on what we are doing, and I hope the data that you see today demonstrates that we really understand our part of the issue. But the truth is, probably one of the biggest risks that we face, and one that I'll probably comment more on in our private discussions this afternoon, is our risk to super-stranded patients going up. We know that the care system in Northamptonshire is becoming increasingly pressurised, and therefore I think it will be incumbent upon us to come up with some really creative solutions, and I look forward to our ability to discuss that this afternoon. Finally, and you won't, as I say, hear me say this very often, but again, it was said by system colleagues yesterday, this isn't a question of money. This is actually, can we find ways of spending money that allow us to actually mitigate some of the risks that you and others, Jill, have rightly described here. I would expect us to come back around this. I would not want to leave this discussion without the board being clear that what we're presenting to you today represents still a very high level of risk going into winter. And collectively, we need to work with our colleagues to do more to mitigate that risk. But I hope at least a clear opening to the debate and a clear exposition of where we stand as at today.
Thanks, Simon. Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Just to come back on Jill's point, so the first risk, Jill, on the risk page is around pathway capacity. So we have been experiencing significant gaps, as Simon has said, in care hours in the community, and that has led to delays. So I can expand that risk further, Jill, just to reference your comment and question around the risks.
Okay. Oh, Heidi's hand's going back up again, isn't it? Yeah, Heidi.
Sorry, Alan. Just to note that one of the beauties of this model, if a model can be beautiful, is the fact that we can constantly put in different kind of bandwidths. And if we're going to change something, if we're less confident in something, we can continue to monitor it and flex it. So Andy and Joe and Faye have done a lot of work making sure that it isn't just a one-off model, it's a intuitive model that will inform the way forward. So I think it's important that it will be an ongoing model.
Good. It's good to have a model. It's good to be able to alter the inputs and see what happens, and indeed to see what did happen when we get through the winter and we end up in April or May. One of the things that often happens in the health service is we end up making a load of initiatives, and apparently the problem eases, but we don't know which initiative was the one that made the difference. So it's quite important to try and get the modelling very sensitive. And I know Andy loves his Monte Carlo modelling and various other stochastic things. So it will be an exercise in improving the quality of that modelling. There are a couple of other thoughts, though, that from a system point of view, Jill, taking the point about community nursing, maybe we need a more detailed commissioning process around community nursing that might actually focus on what the system believes would be the greatest benefit to patients and to the system, rather than leaving it in the kind of random way it is at the moment. And I suppose from my point of view, I'd come back and look at, ask the question I keep asking really, which is how much is it worth to us not to have any super-stranded patients, or not to have any more than, say, 30. It's clearly good for patients not to be in hospital. They clearly do deteriorate if they don't need it. And from our point of view, having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wards filled up with super-stranded patients is clearly a bad thing for them and a bad thing for us. Given the pressure on elective, having a safe and secure urgent care system trumps everything. However, clearly the pressure on our cancer waits, pressure on our electives is also formidable. And we sit at the end of the line. If other people can't look after patients, they end up with us. So the system solution becomes very important. I'm sure we will continue to press. I have some sympathy for our local government colleagues. They inherited something pretty bad from Northamptonshire County Council. They're very new organisations. Nevertheless, they are crucial parts of maintaining the safety of the health service across the county, and I'm sure they appreciate that. So that's where we are. I think we're done on winter planning. I don't see Dr. Llewellyn. Andy, did you send the link I asked you to? Because it's beyond my technical.
Yeah, I did.
I did. It's not what I mean. She said she would try and do it on an iPhone. Never mind. I just think we'll have to press on, and let's do the conversation about health inequalities now on the data you've got and the issues it raises, please.
Thanks, Alan. And yes, as we've talked about, this is very much a start of the conversation. I want colleagues to think that this is everything that we need to do. So from the theatre data that you saw earlier on that Joe talked you through, what we've done is taken that information and looked at the patients that have been served within those theatre sessions. So around about getting on for 9,000 patients were dealt with within those sections, and they were cross-referenced against the demographic and protected characteristics information that was available at the time. Worth saying something about the index of multiple deprivation. Certainly I've learned more about that over the last few weeks, and you will see within our county there is a big range of index of deprivation. So the lower the number, the higher the deprivation. So you'll see NN2 and NN3 in the centre of Northampton are amongst the highest deprived areas in the country, and we go out towards the south of the county and you see they're very much near the top of the list the least deprived area in England is 32,844. So just worth bearing that in mind as we go into the data. So when we look at those patients that have been had the surgery and you order it by deprivation, what you'll see is that the geographical alignment is no surprise. There's more Northampton residents in NN 2 and 3 are served by Northampton Hospital, and similarly for Kettering. Also worth noting that we've got within that elective cohort, a large proportion are all within Northamptonshire, 4% at NGH outside the county. If we look at that data in the same way, but by ordered by postcode, it just sort of shows it more dramatically around the distribution of patients by postcode. There's lots more we can do regarding this, the deprivation index, I think, but this is gives us at least an indication of where we're looking at what the percentage of population is and our spread. I think there's probably been an assumption about certain areas of the county that this maybe just challenges in terms of the demand. If we move on to age, you don't expect age to be of elective activity to be in proportion to the population, and what we see is, I guess, proving a hypothesis that we have an increased number of elective activity with age. Crossover point is between that age 45 to 64. Dr. Llewellyn has offered a number of things forward that we can do in terms of age distribution and normalizing that further to sort of draw out some more information. So we will certainly be taking on her advice. And similarly with ethnicity, you'll see the proportion of ethnicity spread within Northamptonshire largely is in line with elective demand. It's worth noting that the Northampton has got quite a large not known component, which has the effect of skewing the numbers somewhat, and you'll see that in the same data presented in this table, where 14% of the NGH activity has got an unknown regarding ethnicity. So, number of next steps. Joe, you'll please add to this, but basically there's a lot more to do in this space. For example, looking at not only those who've received service, but also the waiting list, DNAs profiled by the various elements. A couple of actions in terms of looking at how we record ethnicity and making that a key part, along with all the protected characteristics. If we're not recording it, then we're not really able to see whether there's any inherent bias or inequality in what we do. Joe, is there anything you'd add?
Yes, and from an operational point of view, we're going to be looking at how we break down the waiting list in terms of ethnicity, disability, learning disabilities, weights by different cohorts of patients, and how COVID has impacted on some of those patients. So we do know that some of our patients have waited longer because they haven't been able to attend, or haven't gone to GP, or haven't been able to get off work, and so on and so forth. And we don't know how that's then impacted on their outcomes once they've had treatment, or we don't know breakdown of the groups and how long they've waited. And some groups will have waited longer than others. And then we don't know the overall outcomes of all of those patients going through treatment plans. And as Andy said earlier, that index and how that affects then outcomes and treatments, and how we prepare our patients to get the best outcome. So there's a lot to do in this space, operationally and strategically.
Yeah, and I'll just add that there's obviously going to be a conversation at the Elective Care Board. I had a conversation yesterday with system colleagues around how we form a working group to sort of progress some of this further at a system level as well, linking in with the population health teams. So that's the end of our presentation. I'll just stop
Okay,
sharing.
take the slides down, Andy.
Yeah.
Any comments or thoughts? Yes, clearly there are. And then Denise, then Jill. And
yeah, thank you. I wondered where we were with establishing a shared patient tracking list across the system so that we can understand and track equality of access. I know it's a big ask.
Yeah, sure. So certainly as the Elective Care Board, we've approved the concept of a system PTL. There's some work going on gathering requirements to go and procure that. In parallel, we're also talking to colleagues in Warwickshire who have done something quite low key, and we want to just understand what they've done in that space. So yes, it's certainly progressing. The Elective Care Board is sort of monitoring the progress of that, but you're absolutely right. Having that whole view of the county in order to make sure there's equity of service and patients are going to the waiting list that's shortest for a given specialty.
okay, thank you. Denise and then Jill.
Yes, thanks, Alan. My first question is around the fact that we have got that sort of 14.5% not known for Northampton, which we talked about it skewing. That feels like a really high number. And I guess my question is around how much can we rely then on the information that we've got, given that we don't know about sort of almost 15% of the people to be making what can be quite big decisions here. Given that I've just asked that, the second question is probably really unfair, Andy, but from your initial review of the information, what is this telling you? What are you starting to pull out of this?
Okay, let's hold that. Let's hold that a minute. Jill, let's gather some other thoughts. Jill.
Yes, thank you. So really interesting and useful piece of work. And I wondered how aligned this is with prevention, health and well-being, and what GPs are actually doing in primary care to make sure that they're reaching out to their patients, that they're not presenting late anymore. And that ideally, of course, they don't get to the position where they become added to our list. And also just a comment in that I referenced the End of Life Delivery Board earlier. We had a look at data for advanced care planning and noted that in Corby particularly, patients were unlikely to have advanced care planning. And so the kind of health inequalities is probably reinforced across the piece, whether we're looking at elective or whatever care pathway we're looking at. So very welcome that we're looking at this across the system. One of the clinical leads for end of life is a hospice doctor, and she's going to do some work with GPs, particularly in Corby. So it might be worth joining the dots when we're looking at this in relation to elective care too.
Okay, thanks. A couple of thoughts from me. One is just a simple one. Not all residents of Northamptonshire have NN postcodes, and there will be some in the top corner that don't. And increasingly we'll be using services of Kettering in particular due to changes in the ICS boundary. Second thing is it is a system problem for the data purposes because, of course, the NHS pays for a significant amount of care in the private sector at NHS tariff prices, and we know that people from less deprived areas are more likely to use the private sector or be referred to the private sector under NHS choice schemes. So it's quite important that we recognise that. The other thought is there are several reports in the press this week about King's Fund report pointing out that people from more deprived areas are twice as likely to wait over a year for hospital care. So that would appear to be more of a national number, but we need to look at it. And looking at the numbers from my point of view, I think there's some suggestions of problems, but we don't know because of that 14% and the lack of age standardization and a whole load of other processes that need to be played out in there. So from my point of view, it's I think Dr. Ellen would have said it's a good start, but there's a lot more to be done. Andy, do you want to come back on the points that were raised by others? Andy, if you want.
Yeah, so exactly right, Alan. This is a scratching of the surface. I think it's probably one of the first times that we've probably had a decent go at looking at indexes of deprivation and the protected characteristics. And you know, what it's done is revealed that data gap, which we can look to address. I think one of the interesting conversations at a system level will be, there's so many ways that you can dice this, and what we'll need to do is basically prioritize what we do, because you can, you know, as much as I sort of love this sort of stuff, you know, you can get sort of sidetracked, and looking at the data in exactly the right way is important. So I think this probably gives us a route to look into more things, rather than having some definite conclusions and feeling that we've addressed any inequalities within the system at the minute.
Yeah, I think the important thing from my point of view is that the board thinks this is an important issue for an acute trust. I mean, there are plenty of acute trusts that kind of goes on to do with us. It's to do with CCGs and primary care and social. It's just not our problem. We treat people who come in the door, which we do, but whether we all treat them on the same way and whether we could contribute to that is a very real question. And so we will be doing a session on this in the next non-exec director away day, but you know, I think you should plan on coming back with this when further cuts are done and a greater sense of what the data is telling us. So a good start, more to be done, and I recognise the complexity of it and the fact that you can easily be misled if you pick the wrong data item on this, so it does need a bit of care. Okay, thank you very much. Nobody else on that? No. Okay. Assessment, and it is a good piece of work. Assessment and accreditation. Sharon.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'll make an assumption, obviously, that members of the board have read the papers, so I just want to go through and highlight a few points. So the board will know that we've had nursing assessment and accreditation live in the trust for a number of years, and it really does provide us with assurance, both internally and externally, around the standards of care that we are delivering consistently and reliably. It's also important that we note that our staff also really do appreciate the tool, and it creates quite a lot of competitiveness and pride at the same time. We'll also remember that in March of last year, we made the decision to pause the tool as we went into pandemic, and we pulled out an enhanced standard 5, which was infection prevention. And then in May of this year, as a board, we agreed that we would recommence assessment and accreditation in its updated format. So since May, the lead nurse for assessment and accreditation has assessed 16 wards, 4 of which have received now a 3rd consecutive green, which means they can come to panel for blue status, and that's happening in October and November. 2 wards have been assessed as red, and they're receiving intensive support, and 3 have received amber. You'll note from section 4 of the paper the current status, whereby standard 9 pain, standard 2 patients feeling safe, and standard 12 end of life. Areas that have been assessed have scored well. However, standard 1 evidence for safety culture and standard 13, which is communication, are areas that haven't performed well and we need to do some further work on. So what we're currently doing at the moment is we're doing a themed analysis of the 13 or so points under each standard to understand where we need to focus. We'll do some work with the QI team, with the senior leadership team, to help drive the changes forward. Staff are really excited and proud across the organisation to be engaged in assessment and accreditation. And people, they're even ringing up now to ask when is their turn to do it, because it's an unplanned, unannounced visit. You know, they just want to know that, you know, they're on the list to be done. So really looking forward to later in the year, hopefully be inviting some of our successful blue leaders to board, where they can receive their plaque from yourself, Alan, and they'll be able to speak to us as a board about what it feels like to be that blue accredited area. But I can't finish without recognising the commitment that we have as a group to be developing a multi-professional tool as well. We are currently exploring tools with organisations that already have them well established and embedded. And I'm hoping, with the support of the transformation team, that we'll have a proposal that we can bring back whereby we have a multi-professional tool by the end of the year. I'm happy to take any questions, Alan.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got anything on that, Matt?
I'm absolutely delighted that we're making progress towards multidisciplinary.
Sorry, Matt, I can't hear you.
Can you?
I can now. Yeah.
Just really to comment that I'm absolutely delighted that we're making good progress towards multidisciplinary assessment and accreditation, because of course the best possible care is delivered by a multidisciplinary team, not any one discipline. And please do, my office, I will give you any support that I can to help make that happen. Please just let me know.
I will do. That's really appreciated. Thank you.
Anne.
Hi, thanks Sharon, really good to see this coming back. I'm a big fan of this programme, and there's definitely a direct correlation between accreditation and quality of patient care. Just one thing that occurred to me following the audit committee meeting we had yesterday was patient property, which does impact the whole patient experience. And I wondered if there's a way that we can incorporate that into one of your criteria, because you've got dentures, hearing aids, and it's very distressing. And it did come up at audit, and I wondered if there's a way of incorporating that into this programme.
I'm more than happy to look at that. Debbie, my deputy, would have been at audit committee yesterday had she not been on leave, because she's doing a piece of work on the patient's property and our policy. So yes, I'm very happy to take that back.
Thanks.
Okay, Denise.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Sharon, yeah, this is great. I love this sort of thing, and it's really good to see the progress that's being made. Just I guess a more general question, really, where we've got those wards. I mean, we've got 2 that are red wards, and we've got a number where they're red in the safety culture side of things. When those are identified, what are the sorts of steps that we're taking? Quite quickly, I guess, where safety is involved to turn things around.
So there's immediate feedback given at the time. So if we look at, say, standard 1, there are 13 parts to that. And just off the top of my head, the assessor may have seen something like call bells not being promptly answered, or equipment not being decontaminated in the most appropriate required way. So those issues will be escalated straight away to, well, all of the feedback is given to the ward sister immediately after the assessment has taken place. If the assessor sees something at the time that, where she considers there's a risk or danger, then that will be addressed at that particular time. And then, probably the assessment would at that point be ceased. Obviously from a safety perspective. The learning generally, there's a themed analysis undertaken. We look at where the trends are. We talk to QI. Indeed, some of our leaders already have the QI qualification. Some of them are doing a master's in QI as well. So they have that intelligence and experience that they can then feed back to take things forward. And then the overall feedback we discuss at Nursing Midwifery Board.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? No. It's been a long-standing bit of work, Sharon. It'd be good to get it back, and it's good to get the right level of rigour into the process.
Thank you.
And it does need to be a rigorous process. Does need to mean something really significant. But good stuff. Okay. So next item. We said we would come back on a regular basis with the group priorities. So this is the first one coming back, really dedicated to excellence, group strategy delivery. And this is the one on what the people directorate are responsible for by and large. So Mark, over to you. What have you done against the objectives? Emphasis on the tense.
It's been a long time since I've heard that. What have you done? Thank you very much for the introduction, Alan. So I bring this paper. It's a slightly amended paper to the one that you have in the pack. I appreciate that that was the paper that was presented at the CPC 2 weeks ago. And what I wanted to be able to bring today was a more streamlined version of that particular pack and where we are with the people plan since we sat here 6 months ago at the end of March and approved the people plan and its deliverables, both in the short term and the long term. So I have this pack here today. What I will do after this is ensure that Kirsty and Claire have it so we can have it on admin control if colleagues would like to have a further look into it. And not to create any spoilers, this is also a similar presentation to that will be given tomorrow at the clinical conference in terms of where we are 6 months into our people plan. If I could take the first slide, please, Kieran. Thank you very much. So this is a reminder in terms of what our people plan was here to do and our strategic people priority to be an inclusive place to work where people are empowered to make the difference. And our ambition around that, or our measure around that, is how we know we've made said difference, is to see an improvement in the feedback we receive from our colleagues. So there's no richer feedback than that, which will lead us to being in the top 20% of acute trusts within the National NHS Staff Survey. That is an ambitious target and an ambitious measure for us to undertake across the group and obviously particularly in Northampton, which has been called out as part of the clinical strategy work in terms of where we are at the moment to where we want to be, mindful of the fact that we are moving into significant change management across the group model. So I've got some elements here. I'm not going to go through these. You can read these in detail. These are in the pack already in terms of the people plan was approved. As I said, it has 7 pledges, which I'll come on to in a second. The deliverables, as I also said, are within the first year and indeed the lifetime of the plan in 3 years. There are key measures of success, which will be measured through the People Pulse, which we've launched and Simon referenced earlier along with Heidi. And we also need to reconfigure our People Services Directorate now. We're in a position where we need to create a capacity in order to do that, to align the people that work across both Kettering and Northampton behind the people plan, as opposed to behind historic service functions within each hospital within what's traditionally known as HR and OD. So if I could take the next slide, please, Kieran. These are the pledges. I'm not going to go through each and every one of the 7 of them. These are the pledges that we signed up to as part of the plan at the end of March, and colleagues are welcome to walk through those. If I could take the next slide, please, Kieran. Thank you very much. So this is an articulation of that that's in the papers as to, so what's been happening in the first 6 months of the plan? What have we done? What have I done? What has been achieved in that first 6 months to answer the chair's question? So one of the first things that we have done is that we have been centering our attention in and around the post-pandemic world of health and well-being. So, and this is also a national direction from the National People Plan. One of the biggest drivers in regards to that plan is looking after your people, our people. And so we've continued to focus our attention in and around health and well-being, and also importantly from Northampton is sharing some of that learning with Kettering. As we know, when I produced the plan and we approved it at the end of March, we also at the same time will receive an award nationally for being the Health and Wellbeing Employer of the Year during, as we'd all agree, probably one of the most trickiest years the NHS has ever seen. So we've been taking and cascading some of that learning. We also know from our National Staff Survey feedback that a big area of focus for us and attention which was required was that in and around our equality, diversity and inclusion agenda. I will not go into that in huge detail now, although we have a paper on our res and des statistics later. At the board in July, obviously, we spent a good hour of our time discussing where we are with our ED&I agenda, our strategy, and we heard from a number of colleagues about where they believe our progress to be to date. And again, we heard it this morning in our staff story about where we are. We know we still have many things to do in that particular area, hence the strategy and the action plans that sit behind it. But it has been a focus of our first 6 months. Also, our focus in that first 6 months has been the number of people that we have employed within our hospital. And that goes back to a point that's referenced in April 21 here on the slide, but also again this morning with regards to the international nursing recruitment campaigns that we've been undertaking across our Northamptonshire system, but particularly with our 2 providers ourselves in Northampton and with Kettering, which is no small mean feat to bring in 396 people over that period of time and ensure that they receive the right induction, that they are welcomed into each hospital and that they continue to grow and develop whilst working with us. We've also focused quite heavily in and around our volunteers services. We have a fantastic volunteer services here in Northampton, as we know. We have a volunteer service in Kettering, and we have now a joint leadership in place in relation to both voluntary services, and another area of success in terms of a national award, being shortlisted for a National Unsung Hero Award, which we'll find out the results to later this year. So I'm not going to go through each and every element of this. There are some additional pieces outside of those 4 domains that we have worked on. Painstakingly, I think it's fair to say, we have worked through and have now adopted our first group people policy, which was that of the disciplinary policy, which has taken on board some of the learning we had from cases and the way in which they've been approached here in Northampton, also in Kettering, and also the national guidance and information we received following some pretty distressing circumstances in organisations in and around the country. We have come to a conclusion on that now, but we can't allow ourselves to have every single policy take as long to be combined and consistent across the group. So I was going to come on to some work that we're looking forward to doing in the next 3 months and indeed ongoing. So if I could take the next slide, please, Kieran. So we're not entirely where we would like to be, and that is totally acknowledged. I acknowledge that from a process and a consistency and what frustrates people perspective. When we now look at where we are with all of the stuff that I've said before, we're now very much in an era, if you don't mind me using the phrase, of process and consistency, and this is something that we're going to focus a huge amount of our attention as a people directorate in the next 3 months. And I've listed here some of the items that we are going to focus on, or 4 main items that we'll focus on. The first one is policy development and how we have consistency in those policies across the group. That's going to be really important. That will be something we hear at our clinical conference tomorrow. Both hospitals have a job planning policies for our medical consultants, and they are broadly similar. The key in that word, they are broadly similar, they are not the same. And we're going to need to work through that in terms of consistency for allocation of PAs, which is time and so on and so forth for our clinical teams, but also many other areas. If we look at our organisational change policy, our absence policy, and so on and so forth, they are very slightly different because the organisations have been set up to negotiate those locally, and we now need to bring them together to ensure there's that consistency as to when teams start working more closely together, they are able to see that they will be both treated in the same way and therefore fairly, not to be dependent on which organisation they work for. We have rates of pay at the moment. This is one of the biggest topics every week. Not a week goes by, in fact, where there is not a comparison given to me in one way, shape, form or another, where people in one hospital are paid slightly different from that in another hospital. It's starting to bear itself out at the moment with regards to temporary staffing rates, but it also applies to substantive roles. And again, because 2 separate hospitals, 2 separate job evaluation processes and procedures, and 2 slightly separate job descriptions where some have additional duties, some do not have those duties, and therefore they result in different grades. But clearly, as we work together and collaborate together, those comparisons are made, and we need to really undertake a fundamental piece of work in regards to this, which has drifted slightly. So we worked actually quite closely together as 2 hospitals is in Northampton and Kettering about 3 years ago, when I was at Kettering and Janine was here in Northampton. We worked quite closely together on temporary staffing rates, and that has been somewhat distorted over that period of time, and we need to bring that back. Again, that's not something that's going to happen we'll get to that by Christmas or next year or so on and so forth. That's something we're doing in the here and now. John and I and the transformation team have made some appointments that will help us with that, to take some action with regards to controls and indeed the consistency of rates across both hospitals in the coming weeks, not months and months. In the coming weeks, all of these things will take place. We also have we're at the very final stages of the Memorandum of Understanding, which is something that we can put in place to ease and free up the access and movement of colleagues between both sites without having to go through rigorous pre-employment checks. There is a document that we can put in place, which we will do, in terms of we trust, we believe, we acknowledge each other's occupational health approvals and pre-employment checks from one hospital to the other, which enables colleagues to work between. Historically, as colleagues will know, this has resulted in lots of duplication and lots of honorary contracts and lots of work and effort. And we need to remove those or remove this as a barrier again, as people start working in more collaborated services. We can't be dealing with that transactional elements, because we've got a lot of transformational work to be going on within OD, and we need to therefore take away any duplication in transactional activity. And it may seem like a relatively straightforward point in the final one, but in a consistent employment contract, because in doing that in this quarter, so the quarter of Q3, will enable us to not have to continue to do the other work. It's almost like we stem the flow now. We have a consistent employment contract. Again, they're very, very similar, but they are not the same, and we need to work on that as a team, and I believe that's something that we can absolutely do in the next 3 months. So those 4 things will be done in the next 4 months, so certainly before I come back to present our next half-yearly review of this people plan, because I know they're sources of frustrations for people, and they are potential barriers and issues as to why it makes it challenging for people to collaborate and provide their services, whether it be clinical or non-clinical services. In addition, we do have the organisational development team at CPC 2 weeks ago, so our collaboration programme committee 2 weeks ago. I talked about 23 requests, it's now 34, but we have some significant work being undertaken here in terms of understanding the content and the requirement of those OD interventions, and where they sit in our priorities and what risk they carry. So are they a risk with regards to our staff survey and what people have said beforehand and taken action in and around that? Are they a risk to our clinical collaboration and further progressing that element of work, or so on and so forth? That is being undertaken as we speak right now. And of course, the People Pulse, which has been referenced by a number of us already this morning. This is going to be our most intelligent measure as to whether or not the people plan is having an impact or not within our colleagues that work in both hospitals. And having put that out in September, which I was really pleased to do before the National Staff Survey came out, it gives us a good indication as to how people feel working, given all of the constraints and circumstances that we've discussed this morning. And it enables us then also to take action. So it's not just to tell us how you feel, it's also provide us with suggestions as to what we could do differently for you. And there is work to be undertaken in different services in both hospitals where there are particular elements of challenge or concern. And equally, there's areas that we need to positively reinforce and celebrate that we're doing some things really well. The overall results of over 1,500 people responding to our first ever pulse survey from a more collective, collaborative element is that people have told us that they would like to understand a bit more about the group. So we are changing some of our communications and our order of communications with regards to that. And we're rowing back and we're coming back to, this is the group, this is why we are a group, this is the intention of the group moving forward. And then there are some elements in regards to teamwork. So it appears from the results that we have seen that some of the most important, the most important factor in as to how people feel, whether positive or negative, is in regards to the team in which they work within. And again, how do we reinforce some of that positivity and take the learning from those areas where it's a success, and how do we bring that into the areas where there are particular challenges that people have in regards to teamwork, and ensuring people are looking out for and supporting one another. We've talked about in the winter modelling, we've talked about in the elective recovery programme. These are challenging times and circumstances, and we need to support one another to be able to deal with the challenges and ensure that we can provide that patient care that we all desire and aspire to do. And the third element of the People Pulse survey is around visibility. So I think people have obviously clearly become used to senior colleagues being available on this type of technology, whether it be Zoom or MS Teams or whatever it may be. But there is definitely now that element or that call and requirement more for physical visibility in and around both hospitals, and that's something that we'll be working on in terms of how we ensure that, given again some of the infection control elements that we also need to of course adhere to as we move forward. But it is really great, really real-time information. So normally I would have been saying to you, right, so we've done the survey, now we're waiting for a couple of months until we get our results, and I'm waiting a few more months till we get the benchmark results. We're benchmarked against ourselves. We've had the results. It closed in the middle of last week. We know the outcomes and the outputs, and we know what interventions we need to put in place from a corporate perspective. We're now going to work through what we do in a more service-based perspective. That being said, in terms of what we intend to do in the next 3 months, there is lots of other developments that we're working on. In August, we received a paper at our Joint People Committee with regards to our temporary staffing model and the fact that we wish to combine those in the near future. So we don't have a NGH and a KGH bank service. We have a collaborative group bank service, which will enable, hopefully, greater working between one another, people's access to work on each other's bank more freely, and of course, opportunities to see and understand what happens in and around each hospital. We also have a number of other elements in terms of the appraisal process needs to be redeveloped based on our group values and priorities. A joint occupational health service provision. I haven't talked a lot yet in this presentation in relation to the fantastic work that our RH services and teams have undertaken in the last 8-9 months in vaccinating so many colleagues across both of our hospitals, firstly, obviously from a flu perspective, but then straight into the COVID-19 vaccination. But they understand, and as they're working closer together, there are many synergies that they could probably do once as opposed to duplicate, and we need to get moving on that as well. Our alignment of our statutory and mandatory training is really important. This is another one of those things where we are very similar but not the same, and particularly as we've moved to more remote statutory and mandatory training, we need to make this more consistent because we will have people working within both hospitals, and therefore the consistency remains key. And of course, as I've already name-checked and mentioned, the volunteers and the award in which they are nominated for coming up in the next couple of months, it would be remiss of me to say that we don't have or to forget the desire that we have, which is to be the largest volunteer base within the acute sector within the NHS across both of the hospitals within the group. That's another big ambition, but something that we absolutely believe is achievable. And we are seeing from the diversity of the volunteers that we have joining us in our hospitals, how that then impacts on potential recruitment opportunities in the future too. So people have an understanding as to what it's like to work within our services or to volunteer within our services, and then they can see that whether or not they wish to develop a career working within the NHS, which is ever so important. The next slide goes into a bit more information that's also contained in the pack with regards to how we monitor the performance of our people plan. It's fair to say we're not totally there yet with our reporting in the Joint People Committee, but we are working upon that. But I am conscious of time and the need for questions and so on and so forth. So I will pause there. Thank you very much for the slides, Kieran, and open to any questions.
Okay, any questions or comments on progress in the Anne?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Mark, for the update and progress so far. I just wondered, in the light of our concerns and challenges around medical vacancies and consultant vacancies, whether we've considered fast tracking developing innovative workforce roles like the ACPs, where you repurpose, vacant consultant roles, allowing them to focus on more complex cases. And I know we've got some examples in the hospital, but I wondered if that is something we should be fast tracking. Sorry, my battery is just about to die. So but I wondered if we should be fast tracking that and putting a leader in charge to put it all together in terms of governance supervision, because I think that offers real potential for us. Thank you. I'm going to replug my.
Okay, David, and then who else have I got? David, and then Matt, and then we'll come back to Mark. David.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for that update, Mark. And it's really good to see the work that's being done on the people plan. And we do get a very, very full and thorough assessment at the people committee on the work that's going on. I do think it's important that we get the people plan metrics on a page. Pretty soon. It's pretty much a blank sheet at the moment, and it's something which really does articulate how we're doing against our stated goals. The other thing I would like to ask is, the pulse survey, which is great. I think this is something we have to do. We have an 8% response rate. I mean, is that good? Is that bad? Is that about where it should be? I presume the industry, the opinion poll industry has a standard for this. Are we meeting the standard, or is this some sort of variation?
Okay, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. So put my hand up to answer Anne's question, which very succinctly is, the answer is yes, and I'm in discussions with John and others in terms of building a small team to lead that piece of work of a competency-based model to fill our clinical gaps.
Okay, thanks. Matt, back to you. Yes, Mark, sorry.
Thank you, Alan. Too many M's. So thank you, Matt, for the ACP question, or for answering the APC question. From a metrics perspective, David, I totally agree. That's part of the conversation following the IPR, IGR. What is it we intend to measure? And I really am passionate about bringing the people pulse and the views of colleagues' real lived experience into that too, because that no doubt impacts on absence and vacancy and so on and so forth. I think it's really important that we consider that. It's really very right to bring up the pulse survey. So within the paper at the time, there was an 8% completion rate in our pulse survey. I'm pleased to announce that exceeded, it's a 16% overall by the time it was completed a further week later. It's this target that we set ourselves in the first stall of that was 10%, because it's people are unsure and unclear as to what it is, what's the impact, what's the benefit. The way in which we will drive up the people pulse response rates, and so people continue to check in and tell us how they are, will be by demonstrating that we're taking action. What people will get really fed up with really quickly is if we keep asking them questions and we don't do anything about it and we don't respond to them. And so it's almost, it's an element of when we demonstrate that we are listening, that we change our language and we measure the outputs of the people pulse, that will continue to drive an increased performance. In terms of benchmarks, you're right. We had a 50% response rate, biggest ever, if you remember, for our national staff survey at this time last year. And of course, that's where we'd aspire to be for our people pulse survey too, in that to that level. I'm also in dialogue, I think it's important to reflect and mention to the board, with John Drew, who's the national lead for staff engagement for NHS England and improvement. And I'm working with him to understand better what responses other organisations are receiving because of the frequency of surveying colleagues. The one thing that we have to do, that we're mandated to do from the national perspective and national people plan, is once a quarter ask colleagues 9 specific questions that relate back to the NHS people plan at the same time. But what I really like, and what's really adaptive about our solution to the pulse survey at the moment, is we can tailor questions too. So it doesn't have to be so formulaic. We can ask people about things that are actually happening in the group. It doesn't have to always go back to what the national requirements are. But yes, I understand it's low at the moment, but we intend to grow it, and the target will continue to increase as we demonstrate, which is really important, the action that we're taking based on the responses that people are giving us.
Simon.
Thanks, Alan. Just on the People Pulse survey, first of all, I was actually quite encouraged by, we had a relatively good engagement given the fact it was pretty much a soft launch. So there is an appetite for this, and now the incumbent responsibility from us, given the level of response we've got, is we've got to do something about it. And really demonstrate that we're making a difference. So sneak preview mode for those who want to come along to the CPC at its next meeting. We'll be discussing this in more detail, so you'll be able to see some of the interactive capabilities of the new tool and understand where there's variation, because the power of it lies in being able to understand not just whole hospital metrics, which is often where you end up with the staff survey, but people's feelings at quite an individualized level. On that, 2 points. First is, again, tomorrow, we've got an opportunity, Mark will be talking about some of these ideas, for you all on your table to say to people what does make the difference, you know, what is interesting to them. So I would encourage you to have those conversations with people tomorrow. And then just a reminder on some of the things that Mark has talked about, it's often not the really big things that make the difference. We think, and those are important for sure, and I'm not minimizing them, but what people actually have talked about, one of the medical directors came up to me recently and said, and very proudly showed me her second car parking pass and said, I finally feel like I'm part of the team. And that was entirely spontaneous and an unbidden comment. And I think we just need to remind ourselves that some of the things that Mark has referred to in his presentation there are really, really important to people, and we need to find out where more of those can be mined. So do take the opportunity tomorrow to ask people about that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you everybody for that. I think that was quite a good conversation. Emergency preparedness annual report. Well, this is a self-assessment, pretty good story. I can't imagine you want to add much to this, Joe, but go on.
No, Alan, I don't. Just take it as read. Update on our self-assessment, which we carried out in August, which also included a deep dive into our medical gases and oxygen systems. So we have self-assessed as fully compliant, and we have submitted our evidence to the CCG and NHSIE, who will assess that and come back with any questions later on in the year. But just to note the report and ask everyone to approve our self-assessment as fully compliant, Alan.
Thank you very much. My sleepless nights around 18 months ago were all about oxygen system failure, so I'm pleased that that's fully sorted. David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Pre-COVID, we had a number of problems with electrical systems, which led to a significant expenditure of 8 or 9 million. At the time, I seem to recall that one of the tests that we wanted to do was to run the entire hospital on backup generation. And we were scheduling to do that at some stage. And maybe that didn't happen because the pandemic, unfortunately, interrupted. Are we going to do that? Have we done that? Would it work?
Stuart, testing under load.
So are we going to do it? Yes. Will it work? I really, really hope so. The reason we haven't done it, David, is that £8 million worth of work has now been completed. The final piece of that work has only been done in the last month. We're waiting on our network providers just to ensure the cable was upgraded. What we didn't want to do is switch everything off, switch it all back on, and something to go pop. So we've tested just about every inch of it and replaced just about every inch of it. So it's just now set into date to do that final piece.
Okay, thanks. It is important that we test the full system under load, but it is quite scary. I quite agree with you. And there's no point in doing it at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's full load testing.
Sorry, Alan, can I just add the whole, just give everyone assurance, the whole site has been tested. The whole site is covered under load. This final piece is to do the switch off right at the front end, which is the worrying one.
Yeah, I know. I've been there before. So yes, it has to be done, and I'm sure. I know you've put all the things in place for it. So it's a good point, and I know you've put all the things in place for it. Nevertheless, when you switch the whole supply off, you do take a big deep breath and hope and expect, but hope, and it has to be done in a full load time of day. Okay, guys, infection prevention annual report. Well, it wasn't a normal year for infection prevention, but on you go, Sharon. A quick run through of this, please.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair. And the annual report has been discussed at QGC at the last meeting. We've had quite a productive and helpful discussion there. But the structure of the report is as previously. We use the code of practice on the prevention and control of infection and related guidance. I think that makes it easy for everyone to read. We've worked really hard during the course of the year with our hospital acquired infection reduction, where we have seen a significant reduction in our number of patients with C. diff and in our number of MSSA bacteremias as well. As you say, quite rightly, you know, the 11th of March last year, we started off a very different year for us when we had a pandemic declared. During the year, we had 2,584 patients in the trust with a positive COVID diagnosis, and I don't think we can't underestimate the impact that's had on our staff and the absolutely amazing way in which they have managed to care for our patients in the best way possible. We also had the infection prevention BAF at the beginning of the pandemic, which highlighted 28 new lines of inquiry for us, and they have been reported to the board and then subsequently to Quality Governance Committee, providing assurance as required. The challenge for the forthcoming year is outlined within the report. We'd like to see the successful procurement of ICnet. That will really help us with improving communication between the labs and our patients and the operational aspects. And at the end of the report, Appendix 4, we have the forward plan and priorities for the forthcoming year. Apart from that, Chair, I think the report is self-explanatory and I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
Okay, you're right, it is self-explanatory. It's another good report. Are we all right with that? Yeah, good, thank you very much. Safeguarding annual report. Yeah,
Thank
another
you.
thing that wasn't an easy year for safeguarding either, but press on, Sharon.
Absolutely. This report has also been to QGC where it has been discussed. I want to pay tribute to our safeguarding team because it has been a very difficult year, as we have just said, and throughout the whole of the year our safeguarding team has remained working on site and being out visible, supporting clinical areas and services. They've also worked very collaboratively with our partners across the community and local authority to make sure that during the course of the year our public has been made, or our patients have been as safe as they possibly can be. I think the report is self-explanatory. There isn't a lot particularly I want to highlight. Just to note that we did undertake an external review of safeguarding within maternity services during the course of the pandemic, and the outcome of that was that it was robust with assurance of strong governance processes in place. I'm happy to take any questions, Alan.
Okay, anything on that at all? No. Okay.
Thank you.
Again, a good report. We expressed a lot of concern about the whole safeguarding agenda, well, more than 18 months ago, really, before the COVID thing. And it has obviously turbulence within local government makes that a very complicated area. So it's an area that we need to keep worrying about, if you like. Workforce disability, res and des. Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report is for the board to note and to receive. It's slightly back to front in that we had the strategy approved in July and we received a report in terms of what our data was for 2021 this afternoon. So I wasn't going to profess to go into too much detail given what we discussed in our July meeting. However, there are clearly indicators where we are seeing some improvement and some deterioration. We would like to see more improvement as we move forward, given that we're certainly not best in class in regards to this area, and equally that of our colleagues with a disability. There's clearly a disparity given the results that we have in terms of experience within the workplace that we need to continue to address. I'm pleased to announce that the Dawn network is up, running, functional, and was held indeed this week. We just need to continue to focus on this area, and I wonder, as I think through that, as I've looked at this information and we shared it at the People Committee, in terms of how we ensure that all protected characteristics are reviewed, looked at, and are continuously brought to our attention, as opposed to some that have been more specific in the last 12 months. So this is an area that we're going to continue to work on.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Any comments on those reports? No. We've done a lot of conversation about this stuff recently, so we should be on top of it. Strategic Development Committee. Claire, a bit of an obvious thing to take forward, but go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that this paper was taken to the Catering Board yesterday, where I believe it was agreed in principle ahead of any terms of reference being forwarded. But I'll take the paper as read, and we're just asking the board today to approve the reconstitution of this committee, which has previously been a KGH only committee, as you will read, and for the committee in common to meet in shadow form until the board approves the full terms of reference, which will come back in November. So that's the ask of the board today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I think I made the point in Kettering yesterday that if we're going to be a genuinely strategic development committee here, we probably only need to meet every second month. So that's the plan for this. And I don't intend to get involved in non-exec director membership of this until we've done the recruitment process on the 10th of November, and we can look at skills. And in any event, we agreed at the non-exec away day that as part of the governance review, which also tends to come to a conclusion about the same time, we would be looking at non-exec director roles across committees to make sure, that we were asking reasonable amounts of time of non-execs, and hopefully, because that's the plan, freeing up some non-exec time to engage in the ICS function. So it's simply agreeing to having a committee in common at this point. It's also worth noting that this is all kind of temporary, because assuming the Act goes through Parliament as it's planned at the moment, then the need for committees in common ceases to be quite such a legally difficult area, and we can simply have joint committees. And that changes the issues about membership and equity and other things. So there's quite a lot of room for sensible thinking about who's going to be on which committee here. Okay, any comment on that, or is it just blindingly obvious? It's blindingly obvious. Good, thank you very much. We don't have any questions from the public. So under any, do we have any other business? Well, we do really, because Joe Focus is leaving us after, well, from April here, but just about 3 years across the group, Joe. And
yeah.
you can't say you haven't had an impact, you know, that's pretty obvious. And you will be missed, there's no doubt about it. You don't actually leave till early November, I think, isn't it? It's
yeah.
Yes, it's early November when you go back to the frozen wastes of Yorkshire. So, well, yeah. Frozen wastes when you start in Northampton, you start where I come from, you balmy down there. But I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it works out very well for you. I'm sure Heidi and Simon have something to say about it as well. But from me and the board, thank you very much. And from the Kettering board yesterday, who also said the same thing. Thank you very much for your efforts over the 3 years, really. Heidi.
So yeah, I just wanted to thank Jo. Obviously, I've not worked with Jo for very long. Thank her both on behalf of people, because I know she will be missed from Northampton and had a big impact. But I'd personally like to thank Jo, because she's only worked with me a short time, and her values and her approach is something that I really admire. And I think, you know, it's something that we should recognise, that she's had a really positive impact on some people at NGH. And that isn't just in her role in operations, but in terms of how she leads, and I've really seen that, and she's been a really good personal support for me in my first few weeks. So Calderdale are very lucky, and I wish you all the best when you go there.
Thanks, Heidi. Appreciate that.
Simon.
Well, perhaps the way in which I should reflect on your time here, Jo, is by reflecting on your experience in the half marathon, which of course it gives me occasion to comment upon our 3 participants in the half marathon firstly, and note their success. I think in raising, you were saying in the break, nearly £2,000 for our robot. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? But
yeah.
I'll leave the group to decide who did the best. And I know we were all debating who might win last time, or might do the fastest time. But I know you fell over halfway through and were in a pretty bruised state, and you got up and you finished the race. And that, for me, I think is really reflective of the work that you've done both in Kettering and Northampton. Being a chief operating officer, being a director of operations, whatever they're called, is a pretty hard road, and quite oftentimes you get knocked down and you have to get back up. And I think one of the things I most admire about you is that despite the knocks, you've always got back up, and you've really over that time stuck with some pretty significant stuff. So big well done from me, and we will do our best, I think, to maintain your probably most significant legacy, which is Icam, in the work we do as a board and as a group going forward. So well done on finishing the marathon. Hope your recovery is swift, and well done on running the race that you've run here in Northamptonshire.
Okay.
Thank you, Simon.
It's always good to be told you're good. Thank you very much, everybody. 1:30 for the private board on a different link, obviously. Thank you very much for your contributions this morning. See you at 1:30. Bye.